Hi everyone, welcome to Ricktopus. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Rick and Morty Season 5 was not just a disappointing season, it was the worst season the show has ever produced. And it marked the moment when Rick and Morty stopped being a cultural phenomenon and became just another animated show. This happened because Season 5 failed on almost every level that matters. It received the lowest critical scores in the show's history. It made creative choices so bad that they became infamous. It relied so heavily on self-aware humor that it forgot to tell actual stories. It couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a comedy with standalone episodes or a serious drama with ongoing plots. And most importantly, it lost the ability to make people care. By the time Season 5 ended, Rick and Morty had gone from being the most talked about show on the internet to being something people could easily ignore. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The critical reception. A noticeable decline. When Rick and Morty Season 5 premiered in June 2021, fans had high hopes. The show had spent years building a reputation as one of the smartest animated comedies on television. Season 3 had ended with the best ratings in Adult Swim history. Season 4, despite being split into two parts, had kept the quality high. So when Season 5 arrived, everyone expected more of the same brilliance. What they got instead was something different. Something that made critics and fans alike start using a word they had never really used before when talking about Rick and Morty. Disappointing. The numbers tell a clear story. Rotten Tomatoes, the website that collects reviews from professional critics and gives shows and movies a score out of 100, gave Season 5 an 86% rating. Now, 86% might sound good. For most shows, that would be a solid score. But Rick and Morty was not most shows. Season 3 had scored 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Season 4 had also scored 96%. Season 2 scored 91%. Even Season 1, when the show was brand new and still finding its voice, scored 97%. Season 5's 86% represented a 10-point drop from the previous two seasons. That might not seem like much, but in the world of critically acclaimed shows, a 10-point drop is huge. It signals that something fundamental had changed. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. What really mattered was what critics were actually saying about the season. Rotten Tomatoes includes something called a critic's consensus for each season of a show. This is a short summary that captures what most reviewers thought. For Season 3, critics had praised the show for its creativity and emotional depth. For Season 4, they had celebrated its clever concepts and strong character work. But for Season 5, the critics' consensus read, Rick and Morty start showing signs of fatigue, with an uneven batch of adventures that are often more crude than clever. But a major shakeup to the status quo helps this season finish strong. Let's break down what that sentence actually means. First, signs of fatigue. This was the first time the word fatigue had ever appeared in a Rick and Morty critics' consensus. Fatigue means being tired, worn out, running out of energy. When critics use this word about a TV show, they mean the show is starting to feel like it's repeating itself, like the writers are running out of fresh ideas. Second, uneven. This was also new language for Rick and Morty reviews. Uneven means inconsistent, up and down, some good episodes and some bad ones. Previous seasons had been praised for their consistency. Every episode felt important and well-crafted. But Season 5 felt all over the place. Third, and perhaps most damning, critics said the season was often more crude than clever. This gets at the heart of what made Rick and Morty special in the first place. The show had always included crude humor. Rick burps constantly. There are jokes about bodily functions. The show is rated TV-14 for good reason. But the crude humor had always served a larger purpose. It was part of the show's identity as an animated comedy that could say and do things that live-action shows could not. And most importantly, the crude humor was balanced with clever writing, smart sci-fi concepts, and genuine emotional moments. Season 5, according to critics, tipped the balance too far toward crude and not far enough toward clever. The only positive note in that critics' consensus was about, quote, a major shakeup to the status quo that, quote, helps this season finish strong. This was referring to the season finale, which we will talk about later.
But notice what this implies. The season was weak enough that critics felt the need to reassure potential viewers that at least the ending was good. That's not the kind of thing critics say about shows that are firing on all cylinders.
To understand why this critical response was so significant, we need to look at where Rick and Morty had been before Season 5. Season 3 had ended in 2017, and it had been a cultural phenomenon. The season premiere, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, had been surprise dropped on April Fool's Day and became one of the most talked about episodes of television that year. The season included instant classics like the Ricklantis Mix-Up, which told a completely standalone story about the Citadel of Ricks and ended with the reveal that evil Morty had become president. That episode was so good that critics compared it to the best episodes of shows like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad. The numbers backed up the critical praise. Season 3 ended with an 81% increase in overall viewers compared to Season 2. According to a Nielsen poll, Season 3 was the most watched television comedy among adults aged 18 to 24. The show had gone from being a cult favorite to being a mainstream hit. Rick and Morty was everywhere. People were getting Pickle Rick tattoos. Fans rioted at McDonald's when the restaurants ran out of Szechuan sauce, a condiment that Rick had mentioned in the Season 3 premiere. The show's catchphrases had become part of internet culture. Wubba lubba dub dub, that's the way the news goes. Get Swifty. Everyone knew these lines. Season 4, which aired from November 2019 to May 2020, had maintained that high level of quality, at least in the eyes of critics. The season had some hiccups with viewership, particularly because Adult Swim split it into 2 parts with a 5-month gap in between. That decision frustrated fans and caused viewership to drop by about 40% compared to Season 3. But critically, Season 4 was still considered excellent. It earned that 96% Rotten Tomatoes score. Episodes like the Vat of Acid episode won Emmy Awards. Never Ricking Morty, the meta-episode about story structure, showed that the writers could still do something completely unexpected and pull it off brilliantly. So when Season 5 arrived in June 2021, expectations were sky high. Fans had waited a year since the Season 4 finale. The show had been renewed for 70 episodes back in 2018, so there was no worry about cancellation. Co-creator Dan Harmon and showrunner Scott Marder had promised that the wait times between seasons would get shorter now that they had a massive episode order. At the 2020 Adult Swim Festival, Scott Marder had specifically told fans that there's epic canon in Season 5 coming. Canon refers to the ongoing storylines and mythology of the show. The big questions like, what is Rick's backstory, and what is evil Morty planning? Fans who loved those serialized elements were excited. The season premiere got strong viewership. About 1.9 million people watched Mort Dinner Rick Andre when it first aired. That was a solid number. The episode introduced Mr. Nimbus, Rick's ocean-dwelling nemesis, and featured a Narnia-style time dilation subplot with Morty and Jessica. Fans had mixed reactions, but it felt like a decent start. The second episode, Mortyplicity, was widely praised. It featured the Smith family discovering that they might be decoys, leading to different families of decoys killing each other. The episode was fast-paced and funny, full of the kind of creative violence and rapid-fire jokes that Rick and Morty did well. But then something started to become clear as the season progressed. The quality was inconsistent in a way it had never been before. Episode 3, A Rick Convenient Mort, told a genuinely emotional story about Morty falling in love with an environmental superhero named Planetina. Dan Harmon had said he thought writer Rob Schrab might win an Emmy for that episode. It was tender, heartbreaking, and showed real character growth for Morty. And then, Episode 4, Rick Dependence Spray, aired the following week. This episode, which we will discuss in detail next, became instantly infamous. It featured a plot about Morty's bodily fluids accidentally being made into giant monsters, ultimately resulting in what the show itself called a giant incest baby. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Critics started to notice the pattern. Some episodes in Season 5 were genuinely good. Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, which explored Rick's memories and his relationship with Bird Person, had emotional depth. Rick Mirai Jack, the season finale, delivered long-awaited answers about Rick's backstory and evil Morty's plans. But scattered between these strong episodes were weaker entries that felt lazy, crude for the sake of being crude, or both.
The season felt like it could not decide what kind of show it wanted to be. LA Weekly, in their review included in the Rotten Tomatoes score, wrote that Season 5 continues to develop while it blows our minds with new universes, timelines, and TVMA situations. But even this positive review mentioned TVMA situations, referring to the mature content, as if the explicit content had become a notable feature rather than just a background element.
Other critics were less kind. One review included in the Rotten Tomatoes aggregate called Season 5 worryingly uneven for the cartoon that breathed new life into the medium. That phrase, breathe new life into the medium, is important. When Rick and Morty premiered in 2013, it had been revolutionary. Adult animation had been dominated for decades by The Simpsons and Family Guy. South Park had proven you could do edgy, satirical comedy in cartoon form, but Rick and Morty did something different. It combined high-concept science fiction with family dysfunction and nihilistic philosophy. It could be gut-bustingly funny one minute and genuinely heartbreaking the next. It proved that animated shows could tackle complex themes and serialized storytelling while still being accessible and entertaining. The show had elevated what people expected from adult animation. Season 5, according to critics, failed to live up to that legacy. Instead of elevating the medium, it felt like the show was coasting on its past success. The crude humor became more prominent without being balanced by clever writing. The science fiction concepts felt more shallow. The emotional moments, when they happened, felt less earned. And the inconsistency from episode to episode made it hard to recommend the season as a whole, even if individual episodes had their moments. Brandon Katz of Observer, one of the critics whose review contributed to the Rotten Tomatoes score, summed up what many felt. Rick and Morty persists not only for its inversion of sci-fi tropes, clever pop culture riffing, and raw hilarity. It continues to hold our interest in a way few shows do, because it knows we are all capable of great and terrible things. But notice that Katz was talking about what the show had been, what it was capable of, not necessarily what Season 5 had delivered. It was as if critics were grading Season 5 partially on the show's reputation rather than on the season's actual merits. The Metacritic score told a similar story, though with less data. Metacritic, another review aggregation site, gave Season 5 a score of 89 out of 100 based on 5 reviews. That sounds great, and it is objectively a good score. But Metacritic uses a weighted system and tends to be more selective about which reviews it includes. More importantly, the small number of reviews, just 5, suggested that some major critics had simply chosen not to review Season 5. Or their reviews had not been included for some reason. Either way, having only 5 reviews when previous seasons had more critical coverage was itself a red flag. What made the critical response to Season 5 particularly notable was the specific language critics used. Words and phrases like fatigue, uneven, crude, and inconsistent had simply not been part of the Rick and Morty critical vocabulary before. Previous seasons had been called brilliant, daring, hilarious, emotional, and groundbreaking. Even when critics had minor complaints about earlier seasons, they were usually about specific creative choices rather than about the overall quality declining. Season 5 was the first time that the critical consensus suggested the show itself might be losing its way. This mattered because Rick and Morty had always been a critic's darling. The show's reputation had been built on critical acclaim as much as on fan enthusiasm. When people asked, "Is Rick and Morty worth watching?" the answer had always been an easy yes, backed up by universal critical praise. But after Season 5, that answer became more complicated. Sure, the show was still worth watching, but maybe not every episode. Sure, it still had moments of brilliance, but it also had episodes that were skippable or even actively bad. That inconsistency was new and concerning. The critical reception of Season 5 mattered for another reason, too. It influenced how fans talked about the show. When professional critics start saying a show is declining in quality, it gives permission for fans to voice their own concerns. And indeed, fan reactions to Season 5 were more negative than for any previous season. Online discussions became filled with debates about whether the show had lost its magic, whether the writers were out of ideas, whether the 70-episode renewal had been a mistake. The critical response validated these fan concerns and amplified them. Looking at the broader context, Season 5 arrived at a time when many long-running shows were facing similar challenges. The Walking Dead had declined in quality, Game of Thrones had ended poorly. Fans were becoming more skeptical of shows that had once seemed untouchable. Rick and Morty was not immune to this trend. The show had been on the air since 2013. By 2021, that was 8 years. Most of the original writing staff had moved on to other projects. Co-creator Justin Roiland was also working on Solar Opposites, another animated sci-fi comedy. The circumstances were ripe for a decline in quality, and the critical reception to Season 5 suggested that decline had begun. The question fans and critics both had after Season 5 was whether this was a temporary dip or the beginning of a longer decline. Would Season 6 bounce back, or would the show continue to struggle? The answer, as we now know years later, was complicated. Season 6 received slightly better reviews than Season 5, with a 91% Rotten Tomatoes score. Season 7 dropped to 77%. The show had entered a period of inconsistency that it had never experienced before, and it all started with Season 5's critical reception showing the first real cracks in Rick and Morty's armor. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But if the critical reception told one part of the story, the individual episodes told another. And no single episode demonstrated Season 5's problems more clearly than the 4th episode of the season, which became one of the most controversial episodes in the show's history. Section 2. Rick Dependence Spray, the lowest point. If you had to pick one single episode that shows everything wrong with Rick and Morty Season 5, it would be Episode 4. The episode is called Rick Dependence Spray, a play on words combining Rick with Independence Day, the movie about aliens attacking Earth. It aired on July 11th, 2021, just 3 weeks after the season premiered. By the time the episode ended, fans and critics were asking the same question: what just happened? And not in a good way. Not in the, wow, that was so creative and unexpected way that Rick and Morty usually inspired. Instead, it was more like, why did the writers think this was a good idea? The numbers tell us just how poorly this episode was received. On IMDb, the website where millions of users rate movies and TV shows, Rick Dependence Spray has a rating of 5.7 out of 10. To put that in perspective, most Rick and Morty episodes score between 8 and 9 out of 10. The very best episodes, like the Rick Lantis Mix-Up or the Vat of Acid episode, score above 9.5. Even episodes that fans consider just okay usually score around 7.5 or 8. A 5.7 is terrible for this show. In fact, Rick Dependence Spray held the title of lowest rated Rick and Morty episode ever until Season 7 aired an episode called Rise of the Numbericons, the movie, that scored even lower. But for years, this episode 4 of Season 5 was considered the absolute worst the show had ever produced. So what made it so bad? Let's talk about what actually happens in the episode, because the plot itself is a big part of the problem. The episode opens with Morty and Beth at the horse hospital where Beth works. Morty notices that the hospital has a breeding program for horses. There is a machine that the horses use for reproduction purposes. This gives Morty an idea. Over the course of a week, Morty secretly volunteers at the horse hospital and uses this breeding machine for himself. The show does not hide what Morty is doing. He is using the machine to pleasure himself, and he does this repeatedly over 7 days. Then Rick shows up at the horse hospital. He needs something for a science experiment he is working on. Specifically, he is fighting an underground race of creatures called CHUDs, which stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. This is a reference to a 1984 horror movie called CHUD. Rick takes a large barrel of what he thinks is pure horse reproductive material from the breeding program. But because Morty has been using the machine all week, the barrel actually contains a mixture. Rick does not know this. Rick uses the barrel in his experiment to create a biological weapon to fight the Chuds. But because of the contamination from Morty, the experiment goes horribly wrong. Instead of creating a weapon, Rick accidentally creates giant mutated flying creatures. These creatures are sperm. Yes, the episode's main plot revolves around giant sperm monsters attacking America. They are the size of cars. They fly through the air, they attack and kill people, and they are all because Rick used Morty's contaminated sample without realizing it. The episode then follows Rick and the family as they try to deal with this crisis. Morty knows that he is responsible. but he is too embarrassed to tell anyone the truth. So he lies and makes excuses while people die and cities are destroyed by these giant sperm monsters.
Eventually, the President of the United States, a recurring character in the show, comes up with a plan. The military will create a giant human egg and put it in space. The sperm will be attracted to the egg, fly up to it, and then the military can destroy them all at once. Summer, Morty's sister, has to provide the egg because she is female. The military takes one of her eggs and makes it huge, launching it into space on a rocket. The plan seems to be working. The sperm all fly toward the egg in space. But then the truth comes out. One of the sperm monsters, who can talk, reveals that these are not just any sperm. They came from Morty. Everyone realizes what this means. If the sperm reaches Summer's egg, it will create a baby. And because Morty and Summer are siblings, this would be an incest baby. A giant incest baby in space. The president tries to stop it from happening, the military fights to keep the sperm away from the egg, but one sperm, nicknamed Sticky by Morty earlier in the episode, manages to get through. The egg is fertilized. The giant incest baby is created. The president, for political reasons, cannot simply destroy the baby, so instead he has it launched into deep space. The episode ends with this giant incest baby floating in space and the family dealing with the aftermath of what happened. That is the plot. Reading that summary, you can probably already see some of the problems. The entire episode is built around jokes about reproductive functions. Every scene either features characters talking about these functions, showing these functions, or dealing with the consequences of these functions. The show had always included crude humor, but this was different. This was an entire 22-minute episode where almost every joke was about the same crude subject matter. Critics were harsh in their reviews. Den of Geek, a popular entertainment website, said the episode had diminishing returns, where the laughs taper off as the zaniness amps up. What this means is that the episode started with a funny premise, but instead of building on that humor, clever ways, it just kept making the same type of joke over and over again, getting louder and wilder, but not actually funnier. The review specifically mentioned that one of the final gags is just Rick French kissing an anthropomorphic horse, which I guess is meant to be intrinsically funny. It's not, though. Collider, another major entertainment website, published a review that got to the heart of why fans were so disappointed. The review pointed out that even when Rick and Morty has resorted to gross humor, it's always been for some larger purpose, mostly for an ending joke where Rick reveals it's all been a trick to teach Morty something. But not here. Rick never discovers that it was all Morty's fault until he comes out and says it. And there is no clever comeback, no last hurrah, just a joke about a giant incest baby. That's it. This is a crucial point. Previous Rick and Morty episodes that featured crude or gross humor almost always had a reason for including it. The humor served the story, or revealed something about the characters, or built to a surprising twist. Pickle Rick, one of the show's most famous episodes, featured Rick turning himself into a pickle to avoid family therapy. The episode was gross and violent, with Rick killing rats and building a suit out of their body parts. But all of that served a larger point about Rick avoiding emotional vulnerability. The gross stuff was not just there to be gross, it meant something. Rick Dependent Spray had no larger point. The crude humor was not building to anything meaningful. Morty did not learn a lesson. Rick did not have a clever plan. The family dynamics were not explored in any deep way. The episode was just crude for the sake of being crude, loud for the sake of being loud, and shocking for the sake of being shocking. Variety, a major entertainment trade publication, published a review that questioned why the episode even exists. The review said the episode seemingly exists in its own little world, both in terms of scheduling and the very premises and execution. Sometimes it comes across like Justin Roiland, Dan Harmon, and the rest of the Rick and Morty writers' room create episodes specifically just to see how inaccessible they can be to outsiders, or to see just how poorly they will land if they were. Possibly someone's first episode of the series. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if you had never seen Rick and Morty before. Imagine someone told you it was a brilliant, Emmy-winning animated comedy with clever science fiction concepts and surprising emotional depth. Then imagine Rick Dependent Spray was the first episode you ever watched. You would probably think your friend had lied to you about what kind of show this was.
You would probably never watch another episode. That is what Variety meant by inaccessible to outsiders. The review site Keen Gamer said that the episode showed a lack of faith in their core concept. This was a reference to a joke within the episode itself. At one point, Rick and Morty are watching Interdimensional Cable, a recurring bit in the show where they watch TV from other dimensions. They comment on one show saying it mucked it up by adding vampires to a story that did not need them, showing a lack of faith in their core concept. The irony was that Rick Dependent Spray did exactly this. The episode had a premise about Morty being embarrassed about something he did. That could have been a simple, relatable story about teenage shame and learning to be honest. But instead, the writers added giant flying sperm monsters, underground horse people, space battles, and a giant incest baby. They mucked up their own core concept by not trusting that a simpler story could work. On IMDb, individual viewers left reviews that captured the fan frustration. One user wrote, "It felt like the soul was sucked out of the show with this episode." I really hope that future Season 5 episodes will be more like the first 3 and not this one. Another user compared it to artificial intelligence trying to copy the show's style. Like if they took all the scripts from previous seasons and AI generated an episode from those. These were not professional critics. These were regular fans who felt betrayed by how bad the episode was. The most common complaint from fans was that the episode felt like something from a much worse show. Multiple reviews compared it to bad episodes of Family Guy, the animated comedy that Rick and Morty fans often criticize for relying too much on shock humor and gross-out jokes. Family Guy had built its reputation on random cutaway gags and pushing boundaries, but by the late 2000s and 2010s, many felt the show had declined because it was trying too hard to be offensive without being clever. Rick and Morty was supposed to be better than that, but Rick Dependent Spray felt like it could have been a rejected Family Guy script. What made the episode even worse was its timing in the season. Remember, this aired as episode 4. Episode 3, which aired the week before, was A Rick Convenient Mort, the emotional story about Morty and Planetina. That episode had been praised for its tender writing and genuine emotion. Fans were thinking, okay, Season 5 is getting good now. Then, Rick Dependent Spray aired the very next week. The tonal whiplash was severe. It was like the show was actively trying to alienate the viewers who had just praised the previous episode for its maturity and heart. Critics noted that the episode felt particularly lazy in its writing. Nick Rutherford wrote the episode, and while he had written for the show before, this script felt rushed or underdeveloped. Collider pointed out that after 5 seasons, you can't blame Rick and Morty for the occasional lazy episode or bad jokes. But with nearly 30 episodes left to go before the show's order is up, something like Rick Dependent Spray doesn't inspire much confidence for the future of Adult Swim's biggest hit. This gets at a deeper concern that fans had after this episode aired. Rick and Morty had been renewed for 70 episodes back in 2018. That was an unprecedented order for an animated comedy. It meant the show was guaranteed to continue through at least season 10. But what if the writers could not maintain quality over that many episodes? What if they ran out of good ideas? Rick Dependent Spray made those fears feel very real. The episode also raised questions about the show's creative process. How had this script made it through? Rick and Morty had multiple writers, producers, and executives who reviewed scripts before they were animated. Animation is expensive and time-consuming. You cannot just decide to scrap an episode after it is already animated. So at some point, multiple people looked at this script and thought, yes, this is good enough to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars animating. How did nobody in that process say, maybe we should rethink this one? Some fans and critics speculated that the episode was meant to be ironic or satirical somehow. Maybe the writers were deliberately making bad choices to prove a point about how TV comedy had become too crude and lazy. But if that was the intention, it did not come across. An episode that is bad on purpose is still bad. And there was no evidence within the episode itself that the writers were winking at the audience or commenting on anything larger. It just seemed like a genuinely poorly conceived and executed episode. The episode's IMDb rating of 5.7 out of 10 represents thousands of individual viewers all arriving at the same conclusion. This episode was not good. It was not just not as good as other Rick and Morty episodes, it was actively bad. It was the kind of episode that made people question whether they wanted to keep watching the show. It was the kind of episode that gave ammunition to people who had always claimed Rick and Morty was overrated, or that its humor was too crude. This single episode damaged the show's reputation in a way that no previous episode ever had. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. And here is the thing that made it even worse. The show did not learn from this mistake. Just 3 episodes later, in episode 7, the writers brought back the giant incest baby that everyone had hated. Section 3. The Giant Incest Baby Controversy. When Rick Dependent Spray aired in July 2021, fans hated the giant incest baby. The backlash was immediate and loud. Social media was filled with people saying the episode had gone too far. Reviews called it the worst episode in the show's history. The giant incest baby became a symbol of everything wrong with Season 5. It was crude without being clever. It was shocking without being funny. It was the moment when many fans felt Rick and Morty had lost its way. So what did the writers do? They brought it back. Episode 7 of Season 5 is called Gotron Genesis Rickvangelion. The title is a combination of references to giant robot shows, specifically Voltron and Neon Genesis Evangelion, 2 famous anime series about people piloting huge mechanical robots. The episode aired on August 1st, 2021, just 3 weeks after Rick Dependent Spray. In fact, the episode had actually leaked online even earlier. On July 13th, 2021, Amazon Prime Video in Canada accidentally posted the episode before it was supposed to air. Amazon quickly removed it, but by then, many fans had already watched it, and they could not believe what they were seeing. The giant incest baby was back. The episode's main plot is about Rick collecting giant robots that can combine together to form an even bigger robot, like in Voltron. The Smith family gets involved, and they end up piloting these robots as a team. This part of the episode was actually a pretty good parody of the anime shows it was referencing. The writers understood the tropes of giant robot shows and poked fun at them in clever ways. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, the giant incest baby showed up. In the episode, the baby is now called Naruto. This is a reference to Naruto, one of the most popular anime characters of all time. Summer is the one who names the baby. The giant incest baby that had been launched into space at the end of Rick Dependent Spray has somehow returned. The episode does not spend much time explaining how or why. The baby is just there, involved in the plot about giant robots fighting other giant robots. Summer has to take care of it. The family has to deal with it. The whole thing felt like the writers were saying, "Remember that thing everyone hated? Here it is again!" Screen Rant, a major entertainment news website, published an article that captured what many fans were thinking. The article stated, "For some inexplicable reason, Season 5, Episode 7, opted to bring back the giant incest baby as a pivotal plot point only a few episodes later." That word inexplicable is important. It means something that cannot be explained or understood. The writers made a creative choice that seemed to have no logical reason behind it. Why would you bring back the most hated element from the most hated episode only 3 weeks later? The article continued. Summer naming the baby Naruto doesn't do much to make the gag less creepy, and the entire storyline ends up feeling like a misstep upon a rewatch. This gets at a key problem. The writers seem to think that giving the baby a funny anime name would somehow make the situation less uncomfortable. It did not work. The baby was still the product of what the show itself had called an incest situation. Making jokes about it did not change the fundamental problem, that fans found the whole concept disturbing and not funny. What made this decision even more baffling was the timing. The writers had to have known about the negative reaction to Rick Dependent Spray. The episode aired on July 11th. By July 13th, when Gotron Genesis Rickvangelion leaked, the internet was filled with complaints about the giant incest baby. The IMDb rating for episode 4 was already sitting at a terrible 5.7. Critics had published scathing reviews. Fans were saying the show had jumped the shark, a phrase that means a show has passed its peak and started declining. The writers had all this information, and their response was to feature the giant incest baby again in an episode that would air just 3 weeks later. Now, to be fair, these episodes were not written 3 weeks apart. Animation takes months. The scripts for Season 5 were probably all written before any of the episodes aired.
So the writers did not actually know how much people would hate Rick Dependence Spray when they wrote Gotron Jerrysis Rick Vangelion. But that actually makes the situation worse. It means the writers thought featuring the giant incest baby in 2 episodes within the same season was a good idea. They thought this was a funny running joke that fans would enjoy. They were completely wrong.
Games Radar, a major entertainment website, published an article titled "Rick and Morty Needs to Change, and Embracing Canon is a Good Start." The article used the giant incest baby as the main example of what was wrong with the show. The article stated, "Giant incest baby as shorthand for a dip in quality doesn't roll off the tongue half as much as Happy Days' infamous shark jumping, but it's indicative of the show's worrying downward trend towards shock humor." Let's break down what that means. Happy Days was a popular sitcom in the 1970s. In one episode, a character named Fonzie literally jumped over a shark while water skiing. That moment was so ridiculous and desperate for attention that people started using the phrase "jumping the shark" to describe when a show runs out of good ideas and does something outrageous to get attention. Games Radar was saying that the giant incest baby was Rick and Morty's shark jumping moment. It was the thing that future discussions about the show's decline would point to as the turning point. The article continued. Couple that with the creator second-guessing its audience by bringing the monstrosity back, and it appears that Rick and Morty has turned into a show desperately clawing at relevancy. It's almost as if they knew a backlash was coming. This is a harsh accusation. Games Radar was suggesting that bringing back the giant incest baby was not an accident or a misjudgment. It was a desperate attempt to stay relevant by being shocking and controversial. The problem was that being shocking is not the same as being good. What the giant incest baby controversy revealed was a fundamental disconnect between the writers and the audience. The writers seemed to think that going further, being more outrageous, being more crude and shocking, was what fans wanted. After all, Rick and Morty had always pushed boundaries. The show had always included violence, dark humor, and adult content. But there is a difference between pushing boundaries in service of good storytelling and just being crude for its own sake. Fans did not hate the giant incest baby because they were prudish or easily offended. Rick and Morty fans had stuck with the show through 8 years of gross-out humor and disturbing imagery. They had watched Rick turn himself into a pickle and kill rats. They had watched parasites burst out of people's bodies. They had watched alternate versions of the main characters die in horrible ways. None of that had caused the kind of backlash that the giant incest baby did. The difference was that all of those previous moments served a purpose. They were part of stories that had something to say. The giant incest baby did not say anything except, "Look how edgy we can be." The fact that the baby appeared in 2 episodes made it feel like the writers were doubling down on a mistake. It was one thing to make a bad creative choice once. Everyone makes mistakes. But to make the same bad choice twice suggested that the writers did not understand what had gone wrong the first time. Or worse, they understood, but did not care. Some fans tried to defend the decision. They argued that Rick and Morty had always been a show that did not care what people thought. The show's main character was an alcoholic scientist who frequently said that nothing mattered and that caring about anything was pointless. Maybe bringing back the giant incest baby was the writer staying true to Rick's philosophy of not caring about consequences or what people think. But this argument does not really hold up. Rick is a character. He can be written to say and do anything. The writers are real people making real choices about what kind of show they want to make. And the choice to feature the giant incest baby twice in one season suggested they wanted to make a show that prioritized shock value over quality. The controversy also highlighted how Season 5 seemed to misunderstand what had made the show successful in the first place. Yes, Rick and Morty had always been edgy and boundary pushing, but it had also been smart, emotionally resonant, and carefully crafted. The best episodes balanced the crude humor with genuine character moments. Pickle Rick was gross and violent, but it was also about Rick avoiding therapy because he was afraid of confronting his pain. The Vat of Acid episode featured Morty dying over and over in horrible ways, but it was also about Rick teaching Morty a lesson about appreciating what you have. The giant incest baby was just gross. There was no deeper meaning, no character development, no lesson learned. It was empty shock humor. After Gotron Genesis Rickvangelion aired, the conversation about Season 5 changed. Before that episode, fans were willing to view Rick-dependent spray as a one-time mistake. Every show has a bad episode. But when the giant incest baby came back, it felt like evidence of a larger problem. The writers were not just making isolated bad choices. They seemed to have lost touch with what made the show good. The ratings reflected this. Gotron Genesis Rickvangelion has a 7.0 rating on IMDb. That is better than Rick-dependent spray's 5.7, but still well below the show's average. More importantly, the episode split the fan base. Some people enjoyed the Voltron and Evangelion parody elements and were willing to overlook the giant incest baby subplot. Others felt that the baby subplot ruined what could have been a good episode. This division showed how the giant incest baby had become a lightning rod for broader frustrations with Season 5. Critics also noted that the decision to bring back the baby showed a lack of confidence in the main concept of the episode. The giant robot plot was strong enough to carry 22 minutes on its own. The show did not need the baby subplot. Its inclusion felt tacked on, like the writers did not trust that their Voltron parody would be interesting enough without adding something controversial. This was similar to the criticism of Rick-dependent spray, where critics said the writers showed a lack of faith in their core concept by adding too many wild elements to a simple story. The giant incest baby became such a notorious part of Season 5 that it started appearing in discussions about the show's overall quality and legacy. When people talked about whether Rick and Morty was still good, they would bring up the giant incest baby as evidence that the show had declined. When people debated whether the 70-episode renewal had been a good idea, they would point to the giant incest baby as proof that the writers were running out of good ideas. The baby became symbolic of everything wrong with Season 5. The crude humor, the shock value, the lack of substance, the disconnect between writers and fans. What made the whole situation even more frustrating for fans was that it was preventable. If the writers had just left the giant incest baby in episode 4 and never mentioned it again, fans could have tried to forget about it. The episode would still have been bad, but it would have been an isolated failure. By bringing it back in episode 7, the writers forced fans to remember it. They made it impossible to ignore. They turned a single bad episode into a season-long problem. Screen Rant later published another article that put the controversy in context. The article noted, while later seasons of Rick and Morty still include gross-out moments, the show has rarely touched on anything as outright shocking as this Season 5 surprise. This was written years after Season 5 aired. With the benefit of hindsight, it confirmed what fans had sensed at the time. The giant incest baby was not just a bad moment. It was an unusually bad moment that stood out even in a show known for pushing boundaries. The article continued. As Rick and Morty becomes a better cartoon comedy, the show has dropped gags that do nothing but put viewers off the series in favor of more grounded moments of equally goofy, immature, gross-out humor. While Rick and Morty's later seasons are not short on disgusting gags, these jokes are more justified in terms of storytelling. What this means is that the show eventually learned from the giant incest baby mistake. Later seasons still included crude humor, but it was better integrated into the stories. It served a purpose beyond just being shocking. But that lesson came too late for Season 5. The damage was done. The giant incest baby had become the thing that people remembered most about the season, overshadowing even the good episodes. When someone asked, "Should I watch Rick and Morty Season 5?" the response often included some version of, "It has some good moments, but be warned about episode 4 and 7. That is not the kind of reputation any show wants. The controversy revealed something important about the relationship between creators and fans. Fans do not expect perfection. They understand that not every episode can be a masterpiece, but they do expect that creators will listen and learn from mistakes. By featuring the giant incest baby twice, the writers sent a message that they were not listening. They were going to make the show they wanted to make, regardless of what fans thought. That attitude might sound admirably independent, but it alienated the very people who had made the show successful in the first place. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, the giant incest baby was not the only way Season 5 alienated its audience. The season had a bigger structural problem that went beyond any single joke or plot point. The show had become obsessed with commenting on itself, and that self-awareness was killing the fun. Section 4. The Meta-Humor Overload. Meta-humor is when a show makes jokes about being a show. It is when characters acknowledge that they are on television, or when they comment on storytelling rules and patterns. For example, if a character in a TV show says, "This is just like that episode where we learned about friendship," that is meta-humor. The character is aware that they are in a TV show with episodes. When done well, meta-humor can be clever and funny. It shows that the writers are smart enough to see the patterns in their own work and play with them. Rick and Morty had always included meta-humor. Rick would occasionally break the fourth wall, which means talking directly to the audience or acknowledging that he is a character on a show. But in Season 5, the meta-humor stopped being an occasional clever joke and became a constant presence that got in the way of the actual stories. Slash Film, a major entertainment website, published an article that identified this as one of Season 5's biggest problems. The article stated, "Season 5 in particular really went overboard with the fourth wall jokes. Seemingly every time a trope of any sort occurred, the show would make sure a character would remark on the trope. This sort of humor is funny in small doses, but by Season 5, it's constantly breaking immersion and undermining any sense of stakes." Let's break down what that means. A trope is a common pattern or device used in storytelling. For example, the hero gets captured but escapes at the last minute is a trope. Two characters argue but then realize they need each other is a trope. Tropes are not bad. They are tools that storytellers use. Every show uses tropes. The problem comes when characters start pointing out the tropes while they are happening. It is like watching a magic show where the magician stops in the middle of a trick to explain exactly how the trick works. It might be interesting information, but it ruins the magic. Breaking immersion means breaking the spell that makes you forget you are watching a show. When you watch a good TV show, you get absorbed in the story. You care about what happens to the characters. You forget that you are sitting on your couch watching actors or animations. That is immersion. But when characters start talking about being characters, or when they comment on the structure of the episode you are watching, it reminds you that this is fake. The spell breaks. You are no longer in the story. You are outside it, watching it from a distance. Undermining any sense of stakes means making it hard to care about what happens. Stakes are what the characters have to lose. If a character might die, the stakes are high. If a character might lose their job or their relationship, those are stakes too. But when characters are constantly commenting on the fact that they are in a story, it becomes hard to believe that anything really matters. After all, they are just characters doing whatever the writers tell them to do. Why should we care? Season 5 had this problem in almost every episode. Rick in particular spent much of the season making meta comments about storytelling and TV show structure. In multiple episodes, Rick would say things that suggested he knew he was in a TV show and did not care. He would mock the idea of character growth or emotional development. He would complain about having to do canon stuff, meaning the ongoing storylines that connected episodes together. The word canon came up a lot in Season 5. Canon refers to the official storylines and facts that are part of a show's history. For example, in Rick and Morty canon, Rick's wife and daughter died in an explosion. That is an established fact. Evil Morty is a real character who became president of the Citadel. That is canon. Fans who care about canon want to see these storylines continue and develop. They want questions answered. They want past events to matter. But Rick, as a character in Season 5, seemed to hate canon. He actively resisted it. In Episode 8, Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, there is a scene where Rick is inside Bird Person's mind, fighting against Bird Person's memories. Rick says a line that became infamous among fans. The closer you get to complete neurocognitive failure, the more canon-y bullshit is going to try to kill us. The phrase canon-y bullshit is Rick dismissing the entire concept of ongoing storylines as stupid and annoying. He is saying that canon is garbage that gets in the way of just having fun adventures. This line appears on the TV Tropes website under the Funny Moments section for Rick and Morty Season 5. Some fans thought it was hilarious that Rick was openly complaining about the thing that many fans wanted more of, but other fans found it insulting. It felt like the writers were mocking the audience for caring about the show's mythology and continuity. It was as if the writers were saying, "We know you want answers about Evil Morty and Rick's backstory, but we think that stuff is boring. So here's Rick calling it bullshit." This was not the only time characters commented on canon. In the season finale, Rick, Mirai, Jack, there is a scene where Morty is using a device to view Rick's memories. The device shows Rick's entire backstory, including the death of his wife and daughter. Morty wants to see these memories. He wants to understand Rick better. But Rick calls the backstory his stupid crybaby backstory. Those are his exact words. He is dismissing his own tragic history as stupid and unimportant. Now, you might argue that this is just Rick being Rick. He is a character who hates emotions and vulnerability. Of course he would mock his own tragic backstory. That is consistent with his personality. And you would be right, but there is a difference between Rick, the character, having this attitude and the show itself having this attitude. When Rick calls his backstory stupid crybaby backstory, it feels like the writers are speaking through him, telling the audience not to take any of this too seriously. It feels like the show is embarrassed about having emotional depth or meaningful character development. Cultured Vultures, an entertainment and culture website, published a review of Season 5 that captured this problem perfectly. The review stated, "The self-awareness it once wore so lightly has turned into a patching over of obviously weaker material, and parts of this season are played so straight, like the episode where horrible monsters are mown down with no consequences, that it's hard to even recognize it as Rick and Morty." What does "wore so lightly" mean? It means that something is done in a casual, effortless way. Early seasons of Rick and Morty included self-aware humor, but it was light and fun. It did not dominate entire episodes. A character might make one quick joke about being in a TV show, then the show would move on with its story. The self-awareness was like a garnish on a meal. It added a little extra flavor, but it was not the main dish. But in Season 5, according to this review, the self-awareness became heavy and constant. It was patching over of obviously weaker material. This means the writers were using meta-humor to cover up the fact that the actual stories were not as good. Instead of writing better plots or developing characters in interesting ways, they would have characters make jokes about how plots work or how character development is supposed to happen. It was like the writers were saying, "We know this isn't as good as our previous work, but look, we're smart enough to know it isn't as good, so that makes it okay, right?" Except it did not make it okay. Trekking with Dennis, a blog that reviews science fiction TV shows, published a Season 5 review that went even further in its criticism. The review stated, "The over-reliance on meta-jokes, in-jokes, and self-reflection came across as self-congratulatory navel-gazing at best, and just plain boring and forgettable at worst." Self-congratulatory means praising yourself. Navel-gazing is an expression that means being too focused on yourself and your own thoughts instead of the world around you. So self-congratulatory navel-gazing means the show was too busy praising itself and thinking about itself instead of actually telling good stories. The writers seemed more interested in showing how clever they were than in making entertaining television. The review continued by saying something striking. While in the process of writing up this review, I actually had to go back and read up on what happened in at least half of the episodes, as I'd literally forgotten entire stories and plot lines. This is a damning statement. The reviewer watched the entire season, then sat down to write about it, and realized they could not remember what happened in most of the episodes. That is not a memory problem on the reviewer's part. That is a sign that the episodes were not memorable. They did not leave an impression. They were forgettable. Why were they forgettable? Because the meta-humor got in the way of the actual stories. When characters spend half an episode commenting on how TV shows work, there is less time for plot, character development, emotional moments, or creative science fiction concepts. The meta-humor crowded out the things that made Rick and Morty worth watching in the first place. To understand how Season 5 overused meta-humor, it helps to look at how earlier seasons used it more effectively. Season 4, Episode 6, Never Ricking Morty, was entirely about meta-humor and storytelling. The whole episode took place on a train that literally ran on story structure. There were jokes about plot devices, character arcs, and narrative patterns. But here is the key difference. That was one episode. It was a special episode designed to explore those ideas. The rest of Season 4 played things straight. The meta-humor was contained to one experimental episode, and it worked because it was the exception rather than the rule. Season 3, Episode 7, The Ricklantis Mix-Up, included some meta-humor, but used it to enhance the story rather than replace it. That episode told the story of evil Morty becoming president of the Citadel. At one point, a character makes a comment about how their storyline is like a political thriller movie. It is a quick meta joke, but then the episode continues with its actual story about corruption and power. The joke does not stop the story from being gripping and intense. It just adds a little extra layer for viewers who are thinking about narrative structure. But Season 5 could not seem to tell a story without constantly commenting on the story it was telling. Rick would complain about having to do emotional scenes. Characters would point out when things were getting too serious or too silly. The show kept interrupting itself to remind you that it was a show. This made it very hard to get invested in anything that was happening. The season finale was the worst example of this problem. Rick Mirai Jack was supposed to be a huge moment. It revealed Rick's entire backstory. It showed evil Morty's master plan. It destroyed the Citadel and changed the entire structure of the show's universe. These were massive developments that fans had been waiting years to see. But the episode could not just present this information in a straightforward way. Instead, it had to have Rick complaining about having to reveal his backstory, calling it stupid, and generally acting like sharing this information was a huge imposition. There is a moment in the finale where evil Morty is explaining his plan to Morty. Evil Morty is revealing the truth about the central finite curve, the invisible wall that separates universes where Rick is the smartest person from universes where he is not. This is a major revelation about how the show's multiverse works. But even in the middle of this explanation, the show includes meta humor. Characters make jokes about how this is the kind of lore dump that fans have been demanding. It is as if the writers could not resist pointing out, "Look, we're giving you what you asked for, but we want you to know we think it's kind of silly." Consequence, a music and entertainment website, published a review of Season 6 that looked back at Season 5's problems. The review noted, the show's push and pull struggle between a continuity-heavy story arc and a static series of one-off adventures explicitly became one of the show's central conflicts by the end of Season 5. Rick Sanchez hates serialized drama and would prefer to keep it episodic with simple adventures, and thinks they'll jump the shark if Morty makes him dig too deep into his sad backstory. This is revealing. The review is saying that the debate about what kind of show Rick and Morty should be, whether it should have ongoing stories or just standalone episodes, had moved from being a behind-the-scenes creative decision to being an actual plot point in the show itself. Rick the character was taking sides in a debate that should have been resolved in the writer's room. This is meta humor taken to an extreme. The show was no longer just making jokes about being a TV show. It was turning the creative process itself into content. The problem with this approach is that it puts the audience in an awkward position. When Rick says he wants to keep it episodic and avoid serialized drama, he is not just expressing a character preference. He is representing one side of a real debate among the show's writers and fans. Some people watch Rick and Morty for the wacky standalone adventures. Other people watch it for the ongoing mysteries and character development. By having Rick take the side of episodic adventures and mock serialized storytelling, the show was essentially telling half its audience that their way of enjoying the show was wrong. This created a situation where it felt like the show was arguing with its own fans. Fans who wanted answers about evil Morty or Rick's backstory felt like they were being made fun of. The show kept calling these things canon-y bullshit or stupid crybaby backstory. Meanwhile, fans who preferred standalone adventures were not getting good standalone adventures. Most of the standalone episodes in Season 5 were weak, so nobody was happy. The meta humor also made it hard for the show to take itself seriously when it needed to. There were moments in Season 5 that should have been emotionally powerful. Rick confronting his memories of his dead wife. Morty breaking up with Planetina. Rick and Morty's friendship falling apart. These were meaningful character moments. But the show kept undercutting them with jokes about how TV shows do emotional moments. It was like the writers were afraid to commit to genuine emotion, so they would include a joke to give themselves an escape route. Cultured Vulture's review made another important point. In a possible apogee of clinging to the familiar, this run actually sees Rick and Morty throw its hands up and delve into Rick's mysterious backstory, something which they'd previously mined. Many laughs from leaving deliberately vague. Apogee means the highest or most extreme point of something. Clinging to the familiar means holding on to what you know instead of trying something new.
The review is saying that by finally revealing Rick's backstory, the show was giving up on the mystery that had made Rick interesting. For years, not knowing Rick's full history had been part of his character. It made him enigmatic and unpredictable. Revealing everything took away that mystery. But here is the thing. If you are going to reveal a mystery that you have been building up for years, you need to commit to it. You need to treat it as important and meaningful. Season 5 wanted to have it both ways. It wanted to finally reveal Rick's backstory to satisfy fans who had been asking for it, but it also wanted to mock those fans by having Rick call his own backstory stupid. This meant the revelation did not land with the emotional weight it should have had. It felt hollow. The overuse of meta-humor in Season 5 reflected a deeper problem with the show's confidence. When a show is confident in its storytelling, it just tells stories. It does not need to constantly comment on how stories work, or make fun of its own emotional moments. The fact that Season 5 could not do an emotional scene without Rick making a joke about how emotional it was suggested that the writers were not confident in their ability to write genuine emotion. They were hiding behind irony and self-awareness. This is especially frustrating because earlier seasons proved that Rick and Morty could do genuine emotion without being embarrassed about it. The Season 2 finale, The Wedding Squanchers, ended with Rick turning himself in to the Galactic Federation to save his family. It was a genuinely heroic and sad moment. The show did not undercut it with jokes about how TV shows do dramatic endings. It just let the moment be what it was. Season 3, Episode 2, Rick Mansing the Stone, dealt with the aftermath of Beth and Jerry's divorce in a way that was both funny and emotionally honest. The show knew when to make jokes and when to let emotion breathe. Season 5 forgot how to do that. Every emotional moment had to be accompanied by a joke about emotional moments. Every dramatic reveal had to include a comment about how TV shows do dramatic reveals. The constant meta-humor created a barrier between the audience and the show. You could never quite connect with what was happening because the show kept reminding you that you were watching a show. This problem went beyond just individual jokes or moments. The meta-humor reflected an attitude that had infected the entire season. The writers seemed tired of making Rick and Morty. They seemed bored with their own creation. Instead of trying to tell the best stories they could, they were making fun of storytelling itself. Instead of creating meaningful character moments, they were mocking the idea of character development. It felt like the show had given up on being good and had settled for being clever about not being good. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But the meta-humor was just one symptom of a larger structural problem with Season 5. The season could not decide what it wanted to be, and that confusion showed up in how it handled its ongoing storylines. Section 5. The Canon Contradiction. Before Season 5 aired, the showrunner Scott Marder made fans a promise. At the 2020 Adult Swim Festival, a virtual event where the creators talked about what was coming, Marder told everyone that there's epic canon in Season 5 coming. Canon, as we talked about earlier, refers to the ongoing storylines that connect episodes together. The big questions that fans have been asking for years. What really happened to Rick's wife and daughter? What is evil Morty planning? Why did Rick create the Citadel? These were the canonical mysteries that defined the show. Fans were excited. Season 4 had mostly avoided these big questions. It had focused on standalone adventures. That was fine for one season, but fans were ready to get back to the deeper story. Scott Marder's promise suggested that Season 5 would deliver. It would give answers. It would move the big storylines forward. It would be the season where everything came together. What actually happened was very different. Season 5 did not spread its canonical revelations across 10 episodes. Instead, it avoided canon almost completely for the first 7 episodes, then dumped every single answer into the final episode. It was like a student who ignores their homework all semester and then tries to do everything the night before the final exam. The result was messy, rushed, and unsatisfying. Let's look at what each episode actually did. Episode 1. Mort Dinner Rick Andre introduced Mr. Nimbus, Rick's nemesis, and dealt with Morty's relationship with Jessica. No major canon. Episode 2, Mortiplicity, was about decoy families fighting each other. Fun episode, but no canon. Episode 3, A Rick Convenient Mort, was Morty's relationship with Planetina.
No canon. Episode 4, Rick Dependent Spray, was the giant incest baby disaster. Definitely no canon there. Episode 5, A Mortican Grickfitty, had Morty and Summer trying to impress a new kid at school. No canon. Episode 6, Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular, was about Rick pranking the president on Thanksgiving. No canon. Episode 7, Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion, was the giant robot episode with the returning giant incest baby. Still no real canon. By this point, 7 out of 10 episodes had aired, and the season had barely touched any of the ongoing storylines that Scott Martyr had promised would be epic. Then Episode 8, Rickternal Fringe of the Spotless Mort, finally started to address canonical stuff. This episode took place inside Bird Person's mind, with Rick trying to help his old friend recover from being turned into a cyborg. The episode showed flashbacks to Rick and Bird Person's past together. It revealed some information about their friendship and how it started. It was the first episode of the season that felt like it was building towards something bigger. Episode 9, Forgetting Sarek Mortshall, continued with some character development. Rick replaced Morty with 2 crows as his adventure companion. Morty had to deal with being abandoned by his grandfather. The episode was setting up the emotional stakes for the finale, but it still was not delivering the, quote, epic canon that had been promised. It was character-focused rather than mythology-focused. Then came Episode 10. Rick Mirai Jack tried to do everything. In 22 minutes, the episode revealed Rick's entire backstory, confirmed that his wife and daughter really did die in an explosion caused by another Rick, showed how Rick founded the Citadel after hunting for his family's killer, explained that Ricks breed Mortys by manipulating different versions of Beth and Jerry to get together, revealed the truth about the central finite curve, brought back Evil Morty for the first time since Season 3, showed Evil Morty's plan to escape the curve, had Evil Morty destroy the Citadel, and change the fundamental structure of the show's multiverse. That is an enormous amount of information and plot development for one episode. Any one of those revelations could have been the focus of an entire episode. Rick's backstory alone deserved more than just a few minutes of screen time. Evil Morty's return and his plan were things fans had been waiting for since 2017. Cramming all of it into the season finale made it feel rushed and overwhelming. FIB, a culture and entertainment website, published a review that captured this problem perfectly. The review stated, "The issue lies in the finale feeling more like an information dump more than a finale episode. An information dump is when a story gives you a lot of facts and explanations all at once, usually through dialogue or exposition, instead of revealing information naturally through the plot. It is considered bad storytelling because it feels lazy and unsatisfying. Instead of earning the revelations through a well-constructed story, the show just had characters explain everything quickly so they could check it off a list." The review continued, "The humor of the show was pretty decent, but there were a few instances where it didn't quite fit and felt like it depended on the absurdity of the episode. Jokes that break the fourth wall and jokes that are self-conscious are great, but get old really fast, especially if they potentially block the narrative." Throughout the season, Rick would quote his distaste in revealing canon until reluctantly revealing it all in the final episode. This gets at a key problem. Rick as a character spent most of the season complaining about having to do canon stuff. He made jokes about how ongoing storylines were boring or annoying. He resisted doing anything that would advance the bigger story. Then, in the finale, he suddenly had to participate in the biggest canonical episode the show had ever done. The shift felt jarring and unnatural. Digital Spy, a major British entertainment website, published an article about how showrunner Scott Martyr responded to fan complaints. The article was titled, "Rick and Morty Season 5 Boss Responds to Biggest Fan Criticism." The article stated, "Fans have aired their grievances over the series' recent lack of addressing its own storylines and general canon, though Scott Martyr has suggested that things could flow more than they have next season." Let's break that down. Aired their grievances means fans complained publicly. They were not happy about how the season handled canon. Martyr's response acknowledged the problem. He said things could flow more in Season 6, meaning the canonical elements could be spread more evenly across episodes instead of being crammed into one. But notice that he was saying this after Season 5 had already aired. The damage was done. The article included a quote from Martyr. Certainly not the goal out of the gates for Season 5. This is an admission that the uneven distribution of canon was not intentional.
The writers had not set out to ignore canon for 7 episodes and then dump everything in the finale. It just happened that way during the writing and production process. But whether it was intentional or not, the result was the same. A season that felt lopsided and poorly structured. Dan Harmon, the show's co-creator, also commented on Season 5's approach to canon. In interviews after the season aired, Harmon described Season 5 as having almost a compulsive aversion to canon. Compulsive means unable to resist doing something. An aversion means strong dislike. So Harmon was saying that Season 5 could not help but avoid canonical storylines. The writers kept pushing those stories aside, focusing on standalone adventures instead. But why? If Scott Marder had promised epic canon before the season aired, and if fans clearly wanted more canon, why did the writers spend most of the season avoiding it? The answer seems to be that the writers themselves were conflicted about what kind of show Rick and Morty should be. Some wanted to focus on wacky, one-off adventures. Others wanted to develop the ongoing mythology. This internal conflict in the writers' room resulted in a season that satisfied neither approach. The first 7 episodes were mostly standalone, but they were not particularly good standalone episodes. As we discussed in earlier sections, many of them had serious problems. Rick Dependent Spray was a disaster. Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion brought back the hated giant incest baby. Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular was a forgettable Thanksgiving episode that critics said lacked the punch of earlier Rick vs. President episodes. These episodes were not making a strong case for why the show should focus on standalone adventures. Meanwhile, fans who wanted canon were getting frustrated. Each week a new episode would air, and each week it would be another standalone story that did not advance any of the ongoing plots. By episode 7, with only 3 episodes left in the season, it seemed like Scott Marder's promise of epic canon had been completely forgotten. Some fans wondered if the show was ever going to address Evil Morty or Rick's backstory again. Then the finale aired, and suddenly the show was addressing everything at once. It was too much, too fast. Fans had waited 4 years since the Ricklantis mix-up to find out what Evil Morty was planning. They had waited 8 years to find out if Rick's backstory from Season 3's premiere was real. These were questions that had been building for years. They deserved more than 10 minutes of explanation in a crowded finale. NME, a British music and culture magazine, published a review of the finale that made this point clearly. The review stated, "It's almost as if, irritated by the fan base's consistent clamoring for more canon-based content, the show's writers have decided to provide almost all of the answers to almost all of the big questions in one episode. Perhaps they hope it might silence the naysayers and give them their show back. It won't." This is a harsh interpretation, but it makes sense. The writers seemed annoyed that fans kept asking about Evil Morty and Rick's backstory. So they gave fans everything they asked for, but all at once, in a way that felt overwhelming rather than satisfying. It was like they were saying, "Fine, here are your answers, now leave us alone." The review's prediction that it won't work was correct. Giving fans all the answers at once did not satisfy them. It just created new complaints about how the answers were delivered. The review continued. Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon might not have created their hit series with a view to world building, but they can't back out now without hemorrhaging viewers who watch the show as much to debate theories on Reddit as they do to laugh at it. It is likely they'll still try. This captures an important tension. Rick and Morty started as a parody of Back to the Future, with crude humor and simple sci-fi adventures. But as it developed, it built a complex mythology with multiple dimensions: the Citadel, Evil Morty, and Rick's tragic backstory. Many fans became invested in this mythology. They discussed theories online. They tried to piece together clues about what was really going on. For these fans, the canon was a huge part of why the show was interesting. But the creators seemed to wish they had never built all that mythology in the first place. They wanted to go back to simple, standalone adventures without worrying about continuity or answering questions. Season 5 represented their attempt to have it both ways. Mostly ignore canon, then address it all at once so they could move on. It did not work. The finale's approach to canon created another problem. It made all the previous episodes feel less important. If the first 7 episodes did not advance the main story, what was their purpose? They were just filler, marking time until the show got around to the stuff that really mattered. This made the season feel padded and unfocused. Previous seasons had managed to balance standalone episodes with advancing the ongoing story. Season 5 seemed to have forgotten how to do that. Bubble Blabber, an entertainment review site, published a season review that noted, "The last season faces criticism for not including the main story, and although Season 5 delivers, it crams everything into one final episode." The cliffhanger at the end of the finale makes you forget everything that occurred in the season. This is exactly right. After watching the finale, with all its massive revelations and universe-changing events, fans struggled to remember what happened in earlier episodes. The first 7 episodes suddenly seemed unimportant compared to the finale. They had not been building toward anything. They were just disconnected adventures that happened to air before the real story started. This approach to canon also made it hard to recommend the season to new viewers or people who had fallen behind. You could not tell someone, just watch Season 5, it's great. Instead, you had to say, well, the first 7 episodes are hit or miss, but you should probably watch them anyway, and then the finale is really important and has all the stuff you care about. That is not a ringing endorsement. Dan Harmon later admitted, in interviews after Season 5 aired, that the approach had been flawed. He acknowledged that Season 6 would try to find a better balance between standalone episodes and ongoing storylines. He said the writers had learned from the mistakes of Season 5. But again, this admission came too late. The season had already aired. The damage to the show's reputation had already occurred. The canon contradiction of Season 5 revealed a fundamental problem with how the show was being made. With 70 episodes ordered and years of production ahead, the writers needed a clear vision of what Rick and Morty was supposed to be. Was it a show with important ongoing storylines, or was it a show where each episode stood alone? Season 5 tried to avoid answering that question, and the result was a season that felt confused and directionless. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, the structural problems with Season 5 went deeper than just how it handled canon. The season also suffered from a more basic issue. Many of the jokes just were not funny anymore. Section 6. The Humor Decline. At its core, Rick and Morty is a comedy. Yes, it has science fiction concepts. Yes, it has emotional moments and ongoing storylines. Yes, it explores themes about family and meaning and nihilism. But the foundation of the show, the reason most people started watching in the first place, is that it is supposed to be funny. When you watch a Rick and Morty episode, you should laugh. You should be entertained. The jokes should land. Season 5 failed at this most basic requirement more often than any previous season. Keen Gamer, an entertainment website, published a review that got straight to the point. The review stated, "The main cause of this step down was that it wasn't nearly as funny as seasons 1 to 4. This is a simple statement, but it is devastating. After criticizing the season's structure and content, the review identified the core problem. The jokes were not working. The comedy that had made Rick and Morty special was missing. The review went into more detail about exactly how the comedy had declined. It said, every episode in seasons 1 to 3 had at least one laugh-out-loud funny moment. Season 4 wasn't quite as funny, but Season 5 was a disappointment. Let's think about what laugh-out-loud funny means. It means a joke that is so funny you cannot help but laugh out loud, not just smile or chuckle quietly. It means comedy that really lands, that surprises you, that makes you rewind because you want to hear it again. According to this review, seasons 1 through 3 delivered that kind of comedy in every single episode. That is a remarkable track record. Not just most episodes, but every episode had at least one moment that was genuinely hilarious. Season 4 started to slip a bit, but still maintained a high level of comedy. Season 5 was where things really fell apart. The review made another important observation about where the laughs were actually happening in Season 5. It stated, "My biggest laughs watching episodes 2, 3, 5, 7, and 9 came during the after-credit scenes." After-credit scenes are the short clips that play after an episode ends while the credits roll. They are usually throwaway jokes or silly moments that have nothing to do with the main story. They last maybe 30 seconds. So what the reviewer is saying is that in half the episodes of Season 5, the funniest part was the 30-second joke at the very end. Not anything in the actual 22-minute episode. Not any of the main plot. Not the dialogue or the situations or the character interactions, just the brief after-credits gag. That is a terrible sign for a comedy show.
Think about it this way. Imagine you go to a comedy club to see a comedian perform for an hour. The comedian tells jokes for 60 minutes and none of them make you laugh. Then, as they are walking off stage, they make one quick joke and you finally laugh. Would you say that was a good comedy show? Of course not. The fact that there was one funny moment at the very end does not make up for the 60 minutes of unfunny material that came before. That is what Season 5 was like for many viewers. They sat through 22 minutes hoping to laugh, and then finally got one decent joke right before the episode ended. That is not what people expect from Rick and Morty. Previous seasons were packed with jokes from start to finish. The comedy was constant. You might not laugh at every single joke, but there were so many jokes that you were guaranteed to find several things funny in every episode. Comic Book, a major entertainment website, summed up Season 5's comedy problem with a phrase from the Rotten Tomatoes critics' consensus. The site noted that the season was more crude than clever. We have talked about this phrase before in the context of critical reception, but it is worth examining more closely in terms of the comedy specifically. Crude humor means jokes about bodily functions, sex, violence, and other potentially offensive or gross topics. Rick and Morty had always included crude humor. Rick burps constantly, characters die in violent ways. There are jokes about reproduction and waste elimination. But in previous seasons, this crude humor was balanced with clever humor. Clever humor means jokes that require you to think, that play with language or ideas, that surprise you with their creativity. For example, in Season 1, there is an episode called Meeseeks and Destroy, about creatures called Mr. Meeseeks who exist only to complete a task and then die. The concept itself is clever. What would happen if you created beings whose only purpose was to help you? The episode explores that concept in funny and unexpected ways. Yes, there is crude humor too. People die violently. There are jokes about bathroom functions. But the crude humor is just one element mixed in with science fiction creativity and sharp observational comedy. Season 5 tipped the balance too far toward crude and not far enough toward clever. Rick-dependent spray was almost entirely crude humor about reproductive functions, with very little cleverness to balance it out. Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion brought back the giant incest baby for more crude jokes. Even episodes that were not as crude as those still felt like they were trying too hard to be shocking, rather than trying to be smart or creative. Rick and Morty had always been described as a sci-fi themed comedy. That phrase comes from reviews and descriptions of the show from its early seasons. The sci-fi themed part is important. The show was not just a comedy that happened to include science fiction elements. The science fiction was central to the humor. Many of the funniest moments came from taking a science fiction concept and exploring it in unexpected ways. For example, Season 2 has an episode called Total Recall, about memory parasites that implant themselves as fake memories of family members and friends. The concept is science fiction, creatures that exist in your memories. But the comedy comes from how the episode plays with that concept. Who is real and who is a parasite? How do you prove someone is real? The answer, it turns out, is that real memories can be bad memories, while parasites only create good memories. That is a clever idea that generates comedy from the science fiction premise. Season 5 had fewer moments like that. The science fiction concepts felt more generic, less thoughtfully developed. The episodes relied more on crude humor and shock value than on clever exploration of interesting ideas. This made the show less funny because the humor felt lazy. Another problem with Season 5's comedy was that it repeated the same types of jokes too often. Rick and Morty had always had running gags, jokes that appeared in multiple episodes. Rick's catchphrases like "wubba lubba dub dub" were running gags. The way Rick burps while talking was a running gag. But in previous seasons, these running gags were used sparingly and mixed with lots of new, original jokes. Season 5 seemed to lean more heavily on repeating the same comedy beats. Characters would make the same types of sarcastic comments, situations would play out in predictable ways. The show started to feel formulaic, like it was following a template rather than trying to create fresh comedy. When comedy becomes predictable, it stops being funny. The review from Keen Gamer also pointed out specific missed opportunities where episodes could have been funnier, but were not. Talking about Rick-dependent spray, the review noted, "The antagonist revealed Morty's secret while Rick was captured. and it soon reached the rest of the cast through a phone. However, their reactions to finding out what Morty had done were brief and angry, which didn't have a comedic impact. Morty was hiding this secret because he feared others being ashamed of him, not because he feared others being angry with him. This is a sophisticated observation about comedy structure. The reviewer is saying that the writer set up a situation where Morty's embarrassing secret would be revealed, which should have been a big comedic moment, but then the writers did not execute that moment well. The characters reacted with anger instead of shame or disappointment, which was not as funny. The reviewer even explains what would have been funnier. It would have been much funnier if there had been a pause, followed by Rick and the rest of the cast shaking their heads and sighing. That is a small change, just a different type of reaction, but it would have been much more effective comedy. The fact that the writers missed that opportunity suggests they were not thinking carefully about how to maximize the comedy in their scripts. They were just writing scenes without considering whether those scenes would actually be funny. The review found another example of a missed opportunity in episode 8, Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort. This episode took place inside Bird Person's mind, exploring his memory. The review noted, there was a moment when they visited a memory where Bird Person and Tammy are kissing in Rick's workshop. The moment ends abruptly when the real Rick and Bird Person drive a car over the memory. That was a perfect moment for Bird Person to have said something about Rick behind his back, or they could have messed with Rick's equipment, but the opportunity was missed. Again, the reviewer is pointing out a place where the episode could have included a funny moment, but did not. The setup was there. The characters were in a memory, which means they could have revealed information or done things that would create comedy. But the writers did not take advantage of the opportunity. The moment just passed without much happening. When comedy writers miss opportunities like this, it adds up. One missed joke is not a big deal, but when you have multiple missed opportunities in every episode, the result is a season that is not as funny as it should be. The building blocks for good comedy were there in Season 5. The premises and situations could have supported great jokes, but the execution fell short. Part of the problem was that Season 5 seemed more interested in being edgy and shocking than in being funny. There is a difference between these goals. Something can be shocking without being funny. Something can be edgy without being entertaining. The best comedy is surprising and unexpected, but that surprise should lead to laughter, not just shock or discomfort. Rick-dependent spray is the clearest example of this. The episode was certainly shocking. Giant sperm monsters and a giant incest baby are shocking images and concepts, but shocking does not equal funny. Many viewers were shocked by the episode, but did not laugh. They were disturbed or confused or disappointed, but not amused. The writers seemed to think that being outrageous would automatically be funny. It was not. This ties back to the crude versus clever balance we discussed earlier. Crude humor can be funny, but it needs to be done with skill and creativity. Just being gross or shocking is not enough. You need to find the humor in the grossness. You need to use the shocking elements to say something funny or create a funny situation. Season 5 often forgot this. It was crude for the sake of being crude, shocking for the sake of being shocking, without putting in the work to make those elements actually funny. The decline in humor also affected how rewatchable Season 5 was. Comedy shows are often very rewatchable because jokes can be funny multiple times, especially if they are clever jokes with layers. A good episode of Rick and Morty could be watched several times, and you would notice new jokes or appreciate the writing more each time. But if the jokes are not that funny to begin with, there is no reason to rewatch an episode. Season 5's weaker comedy meant that most fans watched each episode once and then never went back to it. This is reflected in discussions about the season online. When fans talk about rewatching Rick and Morty, they usually mention episodes from seasons 1 through 3, occasionally season 4. Very few people talk about rewatching season 5 episodes, except for the finale. The episodes just were not entertaining enough to justify a second viewing. That is a major problem for a comedy show that is supposed to be one of the best animated comedies on television. The humor decline also affected how the show was perceived culturally. In earlier seasons, Rick and Morty was known for its quotable lines and memorable moments. Wubba lubba dub dub became a catchphrase. Show me what you got became a meme. I turned myself into a pickle, Morty was everywhere. These were funny moments that people wanted to share and repeat. Season 5 did not produce any moments like that. There were no new catchphrases that caught on, No memes that spread widely. No scenes that people felt compelled to share with their friends. This was not just because the season came out during a time when Rick and Morty was less culturally prominent. It was because the season did not create comedy that was memorable or shareable. The jokes were forgettable. When a comedy show stops being quoted and stops generating memes, it is a sign that the comedy is not connecting with people. The humor is not resonating. It is not making an impact. That is what happened with Season 5. The comedy fell flat in a way it never had before. All of these problems, the missed opportunities, the reliance on shock value, the crude without clever approach, the lack of memorable moments, added up to create a season that simply was not as funny as Rick and Morty was supposed to be. And when a comedy is not funny, nothing else can save it. The science fiction concepts do not matter if they are not generating laughs. The emotional moments do not land if the comedy is not working. Everything falls apart. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The tragedy is that Season 5 showed glimpses of what the show could still do when it focused on actual storytelling and character development rather than just trying to be shocking. One episode in particular stood out as genuinely good, but its quality only made the rest of the season look worse by comparison. Section 7, the Planetina episode, a rare bright spot that exposed problems. In the middle of Season 5's problems, there was one episode that showed what the show could still accomplish when it focused on character and emotion rather than shock value. Episode 3, A Writ Convenient Mort, told the story of Morty falling in love with an environmental superhero named Planetina. The episode was praised by critics and fans as one of the best of the season. But its success actually made Season 5's other problems more obvious and frustrating. When you see what the show is capable of doing well, it makes the failures elsewhere hurt even more. A Writ Convenient Mort aired on July 4th, 2021, right between the season's opening episodes and the disaster of Rick Dependence Spray the following week. The episode's title is a play on An Inconvenient Truth, the famous documentary about climate change by Al Gore. The story follows Morty as he meets Planetina, who is an obvious parody of Captain Planet, the cartoon superhero from the 1990s who fought pollution and environmental destruction. Planetina is voiced by Alison Brie, an actress who had previously worked with Dan Harmon on the sitcom Community. The episode starts with Morty and Rick buying custom t-shirts when they encounter a villain named Diesel Weasel, causing acid rain. Planetina appears and defeats him with her elemental powers. She can control earth, fire, water, and air, just like Captain Planet. Morty is immediately attracted to her. When Rick throws a can on the ground and Morty picks it up to recycle it, Planetina notices and is impressed. Morty awkwardly asks her on a date, and she says yes. What makes this setup interesting is that it treats Morty's romantic interest seriously. Previous episodes about Morty and romance had usually played it for laughs or made it into a joke. But A Writ Convenient Mort lets Morty have a real relationship with real emotions. The episode shows them spending time together, getting to know each other, and genuinely caring about each other. It is sweet and awkward in the way that teenage romance actually is. However, there are obstacles. Planetina reveals that she has kids, which turns out to mean 4 adults who control her through elemental rings. These are the Tina Tears, a parody of the Planeteers from Captain Planet. They summon Planetina whenever they combine their rings, and they control when she appears and what she does. They also profit off her by booking her for events and appearances. Planetina is basically their property. During a public event, a news reporter asks if Planetina and Morty are dating. Planetina hesitates, not sure how to answer, but Morty boldly confirms that they are together. This makes her happy, but it angers the Tina Tears. One of them, Eddie, who controls fire, confronts Morty and threatens to burn his face. In the fight that follows, Morty kills Eddie and then kills the other 3 Tina Tears as well. He takes their elemental rings, freeing Planetina from their control. This is a significant moment. Morty commits murder for the first time, not in self-defense or by accident, but deliberately to help someone he loves. The show does not shy away from showing the violence of these deaths. Morty burns Eddie alive with his own fire ring. He kills the others with their own elements. This is dark, disturbing content, but it is in service of character development. We see how far Morty is willing to go for love. After being freed, Planetina moves in with the Smith family. Beth is uncomfortable with this because Planetina looks like an adult woman, even though she is technically ageless. There is a clear age gap issue that Beth tries to address, but Morty insists on continuing the relationship, and Planetina seems to genuinely love him back. For a while, things are good. They go on environmental activism adventures together. Morty seems happy in a way we have rarely seen. But then Planetina's activism becomes more extreme. She vandalizes cars that produce too much pollution. She bombs the homes of politicians who vote against environmental protection. Morty becomes increasingly uncomfortable with these actions, but he tries to justify them because he loves her. The turning point comes when they confront miners at a coal mine. Planetina asks them to stop their work because of the environmental damage. The miners refuse and mock her. Planetina snaps. She uses her fire powers to burn the entire mining facility to the ground, killing 300 people. Morty watches in horror as the woman he loves commits mass murder. He tries to tell himself it was justified, but he cannot. When they return to his house, Morty makes the hardest decision of his life. He tells Planetina that he cannot be with someone who would kill people like that, even for a cause he believes in. Planetina desperately tries to justify her actions. She says the miners were destroying the planet. She points out that Morty killed the Teenateers to free her, so how is what she did different? She tells him she loves him, but Morty stands firm. He says he killed the Teenateers because they were going to sell her, not because of some abstract principle. What she did was different. It was wrong. He cannot support it, even though it breaks his heart. Planetina, devastated by the rejection, curses him out and flies away crying. The episode ends with Beth entering Morty's room. She does not say "I told you so" or criticize his choices. She simply sits on his bed and comforts her heartbroken son. It is one of the few times in the series where Beth acts like a genuinely caring mother rather than a character written for jokes. The episode closes on Morty crying while Beth holds him. This episode was widely praised. On IMDb, it has a rating of 7.8 out of 10, which is solid, though not spectacular for Rick and Morty. More importantly, individual reviews from viewers were very positive. One IMDb user wrote, "One of the best episodes for Morty's character." This episode shows Morty trying to find meaning in his life once again, which is a stark contrast to Summer, who is becoming more like Rick. Another wrote, "You might disagree with me here, but for me, this was my favorite episode of the season thus far." I'm a sucker for character-driven episodes, and these episodes have been lacking recently. The episode also received attention from the show's creators in behind-the-scenes content. Adult Swim released an Inside the Episode special, where Dan Harmon, writer Rob Schrab, and director Juan Meza-Leon discussed making the episode. Dan Harmon revealed that the original plan was different. Writer Rob Schrab said, "At first, it was going to be Morty getting his heart broken for the first time. The plan was for Planetina to dump Morty, leaving him devastated. But Dan Harmon changed it. He explained, "I thought it would be the biggest mistake in the world to end an episode like that, with her dumping him. Yes, love ends in tragedy. But it would have been too easy to be cynical, like, oh, love isn't real. Instead, Harmon wanted Morty to be the one who ends the relationship, which required Morty to make a difficult moral choice. This made the episode about growth and character, rather than just about getting your heart broken." Director Juan Meza-Leon added, "Morty was going through a growth and a loss. We try to capture that by treating it like an actual dramatic story. This is key. The episode treated Morty's situation seriously. It did not undercut the emotion with jokes. It did not make fun of Morty for caring. It let the drama be dramatic." Dan Harmon also said something revealing about his expectations for the episode. He stated that he thought, "My Emmy is going to that one," and praised Rob Schrab's writing as very tender. An Emmy is the most prestigious award in television. Harmon believed this episode was Emmy-worthy, which shows how highly he thought of it. The word tender is important too. It means gentle, caring, and emotional. Season 5 was not a tender season overall, but this episode was. Newsweek published an article analyzing the episode and noted, "In a show that often aims for the absurd hyperbole, their breakup is handled with touching delicacy, lingering on Morty's pain and angst." His mother Beth, who opposed the relationship, simply enters his room to comfort her son in his time of need. The phrase "touching delicacy" captures what made the episode special. It was careful with its emotional moments. It gave them time to breathe and resonate. Comic Book published an article that quoted the creators explaining why the final scene with Beth was important. Writer Rob Schraub pointed out, one of the core elements is also Morty's relationship with his mother Beth, as that final scene is one of the few times we get to see her act motherly instead of playing on the joke that she hates her kids, like in the rest of the series. This is a crucial point. Rick and Morty often made jokes about Beth being a bad mother who resents her children. But in the Planetina episode, Beth is allowed to be a good mother. She sees her son in pain and comforts him without judgment. It is a simple, human moment that adds depth to both characters. So why did this episode make Season 5's other problems more obvious? Because it proved that the show could still do quality, character-driven storytelling when it wanted to. The episode showed that the writers were capable of creating something emotionally resonant and well-crafted, which meant that when other episodes were crude, lazy, or poorly written, it was not because the writers lacked skill. It was because they were not trying as hard or were making poor creative choices. The contrast was especially stark because A Rick Convenient Mort aired the week before Rick Dependent Spray. Fans watched an episode about Morty experiencing genuine heartbreak and growth on July 4th. They were impressed. They thought Season 5 was finding its footing. Then, on July 11th, just 1 week later, they got giant sperm monsters and a giant incest baby. The tonal difference between the two episodes was shocking. It felt like whiplash. 1 week, the show was treating its characters with respect and telling a meaningful story. The next week, it was making the crudest jokes possible and not even making them funny. If Season 5 had been consistently bad, fans might have accepted that the show had simply declined. But the fact that it could produce something as good as the Planetina episode made the bad episodes feel like betrayals. The Planetina episode also highlighted what was missing from the rest of Season 5: genuine character development. Morty grew in this episode. He learned something about himself, and about love, and about making difficult moral choices. His experience with Planetina changed him. You could see it in how he acted. This is what good storytelling does. It changes characters through their experiences. Most other episodes in Season 5 did not do this. Characters went through wild adventures but did not grow or change. They made the same jokes and acted the same way they always had. There was no sense that anything mattered or that experiences had consequences. The Planetina episode showed that Rick and Morty could do better when it bothered to try. There is also a sad irony in how the Planetina episode's success made the season finale more disappointing. The finale revealed that countless Ricks across infinite universes had been manipulating countless Beth and Jerry pairs to create Mortys for their own purposes. This revelation should have made Morty's relationship with Planetina even sadder in retrospect. Morty had found genuine love, something not controlled or manipulated by Rick, and he had to give it up because of his moral principles. That should have been a powerful connection between the episode and the finale, but the connection was never made explicit. The show did not reference Planetina in the finale or acknowledge how that relationship fit into the larger story being told about Mortys being used and abused by Ricks. It was a missed opportunity to tie the season's best character moment to its biggest canonical revelations. Screen Rant published an article after the finale titled, "Rick and Morty's Season 5 Finale Makes Morty's Planetina Romance Sadder." The article pointed out, Morty gives up a chance at happiness because he is unable to make his morals align with those of Planetina, only for him to later learn that he, and countless versions of himself, has been a pawn in a much more amoral character's plan all along. This makes the Planetina episode even more meaningful when viewed with knowledge of the finale. Morty chose his values over his happiness. He walked away from love because he could not compromise on what he believed was right. Meanwhile, Rick had been manipulating the entire multiverse for selfish reasons, causing far more death and suffering than Planetina's 300 miners. The contrast shows that Morty has moral clarity that Rick lacks. But again, the show did not make this connection obvious. The Planetina episode stands as evidence that Season 5 could have been much better than it was. If the entire season had maintained the quality and emotional honesty of that one episode, Season 5 would be remembered very differently. But one good episode cannot save a season with multiple serious problems. In some ways, having one great episode made things worse because it proved the show knew how to be good, but chose not to be good most of the time. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, the quality of individual episodes was not Season 5's only structural problem. The season also could not decide what kind of show it wanted to be, and that identity crisis showed up in how episodes related to each other. Section 8. The episodic versus serialized identity crisis. There are two basic ways to structure a TV show. The first way is episodic, which means each episode tells its own complete story. You can watch episodes in any order and still understand what is happening. The characters start and end each episode in roughly the same place. Nothing that happens in one episode really affects the next episode. Shows like Law & Order or most sitcoms work this way. The second way is serialized, which means episodes build on each other. You need to watch them in order. What happens in episode 1 affects episode 2, which affects episode 3, and so on. The story continues across multiple episodes. Shows like Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones work this way. Most shows pick one approach and stick with it. Some shows mix the two, having each episode tell a complete story while also advancing a bigger ongoing plot. But the key is that successful shows are consistent. They let the audience know what to expect. If you are watching an episodic show, you know you can miss an episode and be fine. If you are watching a serialized show, you know you need to pay attention to everything because it will matter later. Season 5 of Rick and Morty could not decide which type of show it wanted to be. It kept switching between the two approaches in a way that confused and frustrated viewers. The season started as if it was going to be episodic, spent most of its time doing standalone adventures, then suddenly became heavily serialized in the last 3 episodes. This inconsistency was not just annoying, it was a fundamental structural flaw that damaged the entire season. Consequence, a music and entertainment website, published a review that identified this problem clearly. The review stated, "The show's push and pull struggle between a continuity-heavy story arc and a static series of one-off adventures explicitly became one of the show's central conflicts by the end of Season 5. Rick Sanchez hates serialized drama and would prefer to keep it episodic with simple adventures and thinks they'll jump the shark if Morty makes him dig too deep into his sad backstory." Let's unpack what this means. A continuity-heavy story arc is the serialized approach, where past events matter and storylines continue across episodes. Static series of one-off adventures is the episodic approach, where each episode stands alone. The review is saying that these two approaches were fighting against each other throughout Season 5. But instead of the writers settling this fight behind the scenes, they made it part of the show itself. Rick, as a character, took a position in this debate. He actively argued for the episodic approach. He did not want to do emotional storylines or reveal his backstory or deal with ongoing plots. He wanted simple adventures that did not connect to anything. This was not just a personality trait. It was Rick representing one side of a real creative disagreement about what kind of show Rick and Morty should be. The problem with this is that it turned half the audience into people whose viewing preferences were being mocked by the main character. If you were a fan who enjoyed the ongoing storylines about evil Morty and Rick's backstory, then Rick was essentially telling you that you were wrong for liking that stuff. He called it canony bullshit and stupid crybaby backstory. He said they would jump the shark if they focused on it too much. These were not just jokes. They were the show telling certain fans that their way of enjoying the show was incorrect. Meanwhile, fans who preferred standalone adventures were not being served either. Most of the standalone episodes in Season 5 were weak. Rick Dependent Spray was terrible. Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion brought back the hated giant incest baby. Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular was forgettable. So Rick might have been arguing for episodic adventures, but the show was not actually delivering good episodic adventures. It was just making bad ones. The result was that nobody was happy. Fans who wanted serialized storytelling felt ignored for 7 episodes, then overwhelmed when everything happened at once in the finale. Fans who wanted episodic adventures got weak episodes that did not showcase what the show could do. The season failed to satisfy either type of viewer because it could not commit to either approach. This identity crisis also affected how individual episodes felt. When you watch an episodic show, you accept that consequences might not carry over to the next episode. A character might learn a lesson, but in the next episode, they will be back to normal. That is fine because that is how episodic TV works. But when you watch a serialized show, you expect that what happens in one episode will matter later. If a character learns something important, or if a major event occurs, you expect to see the effects of that in future episodes. Season 5 kept switching between these two sets of expectations without warning. Episode 3, A Rick Convenient Mort, showed Morty experiencing real heartbreak and growth. It felt like a serialized episode where this event would change Morty going forward. But then the next episode, Rick Dependent Spray, treated Morty like nothing had happened. There was no reference to Planetina or to what Morty had gone through. He was just regular Morty again. This made the Planetina episode's emotional weight feel less meaningful. Similarly, Episode 8, Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, delved deep into Rick's relationship with Bird Person and showed important backstory. It felt like a serialized episode building toward something. And it was. The next two episodes continued the serialization, leading to the big finale. But this meant that for viewers who had adjusted to expecting standalone episodes, the sudden shift was jarring. The season changed the rules on them without warning. The identity crisis also showed up in how the season handled character development. In an episodic show, characters stay basically the same. They might have small moments of growth, but by the next episode, they are back to their normal selves. This allows each episode to start from the same baseline, which makes it easy for new viewers to jump in at any point. In a serialized show, characters grow and change across episodes. What they learn and experience permanently affects who they are. Season 5 could not decide which approach to take with its characters. Morty learned something important from his relationship with Planetina, but that lesson did not seem to affect him in later episodes. Rick's relationship with Morty deteriorated across the season, leading to them breaking up in Episode 9. But this was not set up gradually. It just suddenly happened. Summer became more like Rick in some episodes, but then went back to being regular Summer in others. Nothing felt consistent. The finale tried to force serialization onto a season that had mostly avoided it. In Rick Mirai Jack, the episode revealed that Rick had been lying to Morty for years, that Rick had founded the Citadel, and that Ricks across the multiverse were manipulating Mortys. These revelations should have felt like the culmination of hints and clues dropped throughout the season, but there had been no hints or clues. The first 7 episodes had not built toward any of this, so the revelations felt random and unearned. Compare this to how Season 3 handled Evil Morty. That season included several episodes that set up what was coming. Episode 1 showed Rick's fake backstory, which planted questions about his real backstory. Episode 7, the Ricklantis mix-up, showed Evil Morty becoming president of the Citadel. Episode 10, the finale, dealt with the fallout from Beth and Jerry's divorce and Rick's emotional isolation. None of these episodes felt disconnected. They were all part of a coherent season-long arc. The episodic adventures in between did not interfere with this arc. They coexisted peacefully. Season 5 could not achieve this balance. The episodic episodes felt like they were avoiding the serialized plot. The serialized episodes felt like they were apologizing for existing. Rick literally complained about having to do canon and storyline stuff. It was as if the show itself was embarrassed about trying to tell a coherent, ongoing story. This identity crisis had practical effects on how people watched and talked about the season. When someone asked, "Should I watch Rick and Morty Season 5?" it was hard to give a clear answer. If they liked episodic comedy, you would have to warn them that many of the standalone episodes were not good, and that the season would suddenly become heavily serialized at the end. If they liked serialized storytelling, you would have to tell them to skip or suffer through 7 episodes to get to the 3 that mattered. That is not a good sign for any season of television. The identity crisis also made it hard for the season to build momentum. In a good episodic season, each episode should be entertaining on its own, and the season as a whole should feel consistent in tone and quality. In a good serialized season, each episode should build excitement for what comes next, and the season should feel like it is going somewhere. Season 5 did neither. The episodic episodes were not consistently entertaining, and the season did not feel like it was building toward anything until it was almost over. Part of the problem was that this identity crisis reflected real confusion among the show's creators about what Rick and Morty should be. In interviews after Season 5 aired, Dan Harmon acknowledged that the show had struggled with this question. He described Season 5 as having almost a compulsive aversion to canon in most episodes, then dumping all the canon in the finale. For season 6, he said they would try to find a better balance. But admitting the problem after the fact did not fix season 5. The tragedy is that Rick and Morty had previously proven it could be both episodic and serialized successfully. Season 2 had standalone adventures like Total Recall and Interdimensional Cable 2, mixed with serialized elements like the development of Rick and Beth's relationship and the build-up to Bird Person's wedding. The season worked because it did not make viewers choose between episodic and serialized. It gave them both. Season 5 felt like it was forcing viewers to choose sides in a debate they did not ask to be part of. Do you want episodic adventures or ongoing storylines? Do you want comedy or drama? Do you want to care about canon or just have fun? These were false choices. The show could do all of these things at once. It had done them all at once in previous seasons, but in season 5, it acted like they were incompatible. The identity crisis also wasted the potential of season 5's premise. The season had interesting elements that could have been woven together into a coherent story. Morty's relationship with Planetina could have tied into larger themes about Morty growing up and questioning Rick's influence. Rick's increasing isolation and his resistance to emotional vulnerability could have built gradually across episodes. Evil Morty's plan could have been hinted at throughout the season. All of these elements were present, but they existed in separate episodes that did not connect to each other. Imagine if season 5 had committed to being serialized from the start. Each episode could have been a standalone adventure that also advanced the larger story. We could have seen Morty slowly becoming more independent and questioning Rick's methods. We could have seen Rick becoming more defensive and isolated. We could have had hints that something was happening at the Citadel. Then the finale would have felt like everything coming together rather than everything happening at once. Or imagine if season 5 had committed to being episodic. Each episode would be a self-contained story focused on being as funny and creative as possible. No worrying about canon or ongoing plots, just pure adventure and comedy. The season would be judged on whether individual episodes were entertaining, not on whether they built to anything. That approach could have worked too, if the episodes had been better. But season 5 tried to do both approaches while fully committing to neither, and the result was a confused mess. The show could not decide what it wanted to be, so it ended up being nothing in particular. It was not a satisfying episodic comedy season, and it was not a satisfying serialized drama season. It was just 10 episodes that happened to air in order, but did not feel like they belonged together. This structural confusion meant that even when individual episodes had good moments, those moments did not add up to anything larger. Good scenes existed in isolation, rather than being part of a bigger picture. The season had no shape, no arc, no sense of purpose or direction. It just wandered from episode to episode until it suddenly remembered it was supposed to have a plot and crammed one in at the last minute. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, the identity crisis was not the only way that Season 5 failed to develop its characters properly. The season's treatment of the show's central relationship was equally problematic. Section 9. Rick and Morty's separation arc falls flat. The show is called Rick and Morty. The title tells you what the show is about, the relationship between these two characters, a genius grandfather and his nervous grandson going on adventures together. That relationship is the heart of the show. Everything else, the science fiction concepts, the other family members, the ongoing storylines, all of it exists to support and explore that central relationship. So when Season 5 decided to break Rick and Morty up, it should have been a huge deal. It should have been emotional, carefully built up, and meaningfully resolved. Instead, it was rushed, poorly explained, and ultimately felt pointless. Episode 9 is called Forgetting Sarah Mortshaw. The title is a play on Forgetting Sarah Marshall, a 2008 comedy movie about a man dealing with a breakup. In that movie, the main character goes on a vacation to get over his ex-girlfriend, only to find out she is staying at the same hotel with her new boyfriend. It is a movie about moving on after a relationship ends. The Rick and Morty episode uses this as its template, with Rick moving on from Morty by finding new adventure partners. But the setup for this breakup makes no sense. At the end of episode 8, Morty accidentally spills some portal fluid on his hand while trying to refill Rick's portal gun. Portal fluid is what powers Rick's portal gun, allowing him to travel between dimensions. Morty was trying to replace the real portal fluid with Mountain Dew, for reasons that are not entirely clear.
When Rick catches him, Rick is angry and follows through on a threat he had made earlier. He replaces Morty with new sidekicks.
Rick's new sidekicks are two crows. Not intelligent talking crows, not cyborg crows or alien crows, just two regular Earth crows. Somehow, these normal birds become Rick's adventure companions. The episode shows Rick having anime-style adventures with the crows, fighting owls and going on quests. The whole thing is styled like a Japanese anime, with Rick wearing samurai-like armor, and the episode even including a fake anime opening sequence. This is where the episode gets weird. Morty tries to get Rick back by using a chemical that ages him. He becomes a 40-year-old Morty and approaches Rick, claiming that years have passed since Rick left. Morty tells Rick that Jerry died of cancer and Summer married a junkie. He is trying to guilt Rick into coming home. But Rick is so committed to his new life with the crows that he refuses. He says he is happy with his crow partners. Eventually, Rick discovers that the crows have been conspiring with his anime enemy, Crow Scare. The crows are having some kind of romantic relationship with Crow Scare, which Rick finds disgusting. Only then does Rick decide to return to Morty. He goes back to the Smith house. Morty reveals that he lied about everything and used the aging chemical, and they go to the Citadel to get Morty changed back to his normal age. This leads into the events of the finale. The fundamental problem with this breakup arc is that it feels completely unearned. Rick and Morty's relationship had been shown as incredibly strong throughout the show's history. Yes, they fought sometimes. Yes, Rick treated Morty badly on occasion, but their bond was deep and meaningful. Morty was the only person Rick really cared about. Rick had given up his freedom to save Morty and the family at the end of Season 2. They had been through countless dangerous adventures together. Their friendship was the foundation of the entire show. So for them to break up over spilled portal fluid feels absurd. That is not a big enough reason to end such an important relationship. Morty was not trying to hurt Rick. He was not betraying Rick. He just made a mistake while trying to do something behind Rick's back. Yes, that is wrong. Yes, Rick has every right to be angry. But completely replacing Morty as his grandson and adventure partner, that reaction is way out of proportion to what Morty actually did. Comic Book, a major entertainment website, identified this as a problem in their review. The article stated, "The season had been markedly short on stories that focused primarily on Rick and Morty's changing dynamic, but had been dropping small hints that a rift was forming between the two of them. This is the key issue. The breakup happened suddenly, without proper build-up. The review mentions small hints that a rift was forming, but those hints were too small and too few. The season had not shown us Rick and Morty's relationship deteriorating in a way that would make their split feel natural or inevitable. One episode they are fine, maybe a little tense, and the next episode, Rick is replacing Morty with birds. Good storytelling requires setup. If you are going to have two main characters break up, you need to show us why. You need to make us understand how the relationship got to that breaking point. You need to make us feel the tension building. Season 5 did not do this work. It just decided that Rick and Morty would break up in episode 9 and did not bother explaining how they got there. The two crows themselves are another problem. The joke seems to be that Rick is so committed to avoiding Morty that he will adventure with literally anyone, even regular birds that cannot talk or meaningfully contribute to adventures. It is supposed to be funny that Rick is having deep conversations with crows that cannot understand him, but the joke does not really land because it is too absurd. How are the crows helping Rick in fights? How do they travel through portals? How do they understand what Rick wants them to do? The episode does not care about these questions. The crows are just there to be weird. The anime styling of Rick's adventures with the crows is also strange. The episode title, Rick Mirai Jack, is a reference to Samurai Jack, an anime-influenced American cartoon. The episode includes lots of anime tropes and visual styles. Rick becomes like an anime protagonist with the crows as his companions. This is all very creative from a visual standpoint, but it distracts from the emotional story that should be at the episode's center. When shows do breakup arcs with their main characters, the focus should be on the emotion. We should see Rick missing Morty, even if he does not want to admit it. We should see Morty struggling without Rick, even if part of him feels free. We should see them both realizing they need each other. But Forgetting Sarek Mortshall spends so much time on the anime jokes and the visual creativity that the emotional core gets lost. the resolution of the breakup is equally unsatisfying. Rick comes back not because he realizes he was wrong or because he misses Morty. He comes back because his crow partners betrayed him. It is purely practical. And Morty only gets Rick back by lying and manipulating him. There is no honest conversation. There is no moment where they talk about what went wrong or how to fix it. They just end up back together because the plot needs them to be together for the finale. This makes the entire breakup feel pointless. If Rick and Morty are just going to end up back together after one episode without resolving anything, why break them up at all? What was the point of this storyline? What did we learn about their relationship? What changed? The answer is nothing. Nothing changed. They broke up and got back together in the span of 2 episodes without any real character growth or development. The show tried to justify this in the finale. Rick Mirai Jack includes scenes where Rick realizes he is toxic for Morty and that their relationship might not be healthy. Evil Morty tells Morty that being sick of Rick is what makes him evil, suggesting that every Morty eventually gets tired of being used by Rick. These are interesting ideas, but they come too late. If the show wanted to explore whether Rick and Morty should be together, it needed to do that work before breaking them up, not after. The breakup arc also suffered from bad timing within the season. It happened in episode 9 of 10, leaving no time to really explore what it meant. Rick and Morty were separated for basically 1 episode. That is not enough time to make the separation feel real or meaningful. Compare this to season 3, which spent the entire season dealing with Beth and Jerry's divorce. That gave time to show how the separation affected everyone and made the eventual reunion feel earned. The title, Forgetting Sarah Mortshaw, suggests this was supposed to be a funny parody of the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And maybe it would have been funny if the season had not been so problematic in other ways. But coming after Rick Dependence Spray, the giant incest baby controversy, and 7 episodes of inconsistent quality, the breakup arc just felt like another wasted opportunity. The worst part is that a Rick and Morty breakup could have been powerful. Imagine if the season had gradually shown their relationship fraying, Morty becoming more independent after his experience with Planetina, Rick becoming more isolated and defensive, small conflicts building up over multiple episodes, then a major event that pushes them apart. Then, several episodes where we see how they each cope without the other. Then, a reconciliation that feels earned because both characters have grown. That could have been a great season-long arc. It could have given season 5 the structure and emotional weight it desperately needed. But instead, the show gave us Rick having anime adventures with crows for 1 episode before everything went back to normal. It was a waste of what could have been the season's most important storyline. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, Rick and Morty's relationship problems were not the only character issues in Season 5. The season also had a major problem with how it handled repetition. Section 10. The repetitive episode structures. One of the reasons Rick and Morty became so popular was because it felt fresh and unpredictable. Every episode seemed to do something different. The show would take familiar science fiction ideas and twist them in unexpected ways. It would switch between comedy and drama seamlessly. It would surprise viewers with creative storytelling choices. But Season 5 felt like it was going through the motions. It kept using the same episode structures and formats that the show had done before, but without adding anything new. It was like watching a band play their greatest hits, except they were tired and not playing very well. Episode 2, Mortiplicity, is the clearest example of this problem. The episode is about the Smith family discovering they might be decoys, then watching as different decoy families hunt and kill each other. It is structured as a series of short segments, each one showing a different decoy family meeting a violent end. The deaths are creative and the pace is fast, which keeps the episode moving. Some fans enjoyed it for these reasons. But here is the problem. Rick and Morty had done this exact type of episode multiple times before. Season 1 had Interdimensional Cable, where Rick and Morty watch TV from other dimensions and the episode is just a collection of random short sketches. Season 2 had Interdimensional Cable 2, which was the same concept again. Season 3 had Morty's Mind Blowers, which showed a series of short memories that Morty had erased. Season 4 had Never Ricking Morty, which was about story structure but was still built around rapid-fire short segments. Mortiplicity was Season 5's version of this format. The show has a name for this type of episode internally, vignette collection episodes. A vignette is a short scene or story. So these are episodes made up of lots of short pieces rather than one continuous plot. There is nothing wrong with this format. It can be fun and creative. But when a show does the same type of episode over and over, it starts to feel lazy. Comic Book, a major entertainment website, published an article ranking all of Season 5's episodes from worst to best. About Mortiplicity, the article stated, Mortiplicity serves as Season 5's version of the vignette collection episodes like Interdimensional Cable, Morty's Mind Blowers, and Never Ricking Morty of past seasons. It's an episode full of rapid-fire jokes and ideas that launch at such a speedy pace that they never outstay their welcome. Notice that even the positive review had to acknowledge that this was Season 5's version of a format the show had used many times. It was not doing anything new with the format, it was just using the same template again. The rapid-fire pace works to keep viewers entertained, but it does not make the episode feel fresh or creative. Episode 6, Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular, repeated another familiar format, Rick fighting with the President of the United States. The President is a recurring character voiced by Keith David. He and Rick have a complicated relationship where they sometimes work together and sometimes fight. Previous episodes featuring the President, like Get Swifty in Season 2 and the Rick-Turian Morty date in Season 3, had been funny and entertaining, but by Season 5, this dynamic had been done to death. We had seen Rick and the President team up. We had seen them fight. We had seen them prank each other. There was nothing new to explore in their relationship. Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular tried to do it anyway, setting the conflict on Thanksgiving and involving turkeys that were actually aliens. Comic Book's ranking of Season 5 episodes placed this Thanksgiving episode near the bottom. The article stated, "The joke of the smart turkeys kinda feels one note and almost hindered by the seasonal motif. Keith David gets to say so many wacky things as both versions of the President, but something about the final battle feels lacking. The reveal of a species of Thanksgiving-themed aliens lacks the same kind of punch we have seen in better episodes, and silently just enjoying dinner is a unique step for their relationship, but it's missing that oomph we got from better episodes." Exploring Rick and the President's rivalry in the past. Let's break this down. One note means the joke does not develop or change. The turkeys are smart in talk, and that is the whole joke. It does not go anywhere interesting. Hindered by the seasonal motif means making it about Thanksgiving actually made the episode worse, not better. The review acknowledges that Keith David is great as the President, but even his performance cannot save the episode. Most importantly, the review says this episode lacks the same kind of punch as earlier President episodes. It is doing the same thing those earlier episodes did, but not as well. When a show keeps using the same formats and character dynamics, it needs to either do them better each time or find new angles to explore. Season 5 did neither. It just repeated what had worked before and hoped that would be enough. It was not. Bubble Blabber, an entertainment review site, published a season review that called out 2 other episodes for being formulaic and predictable. The review stated, Gotron Gerasis Rick Vangelion and Amortican Grick Fitty are 2 examples of episodes that did not cut the chute. Both are pieces that stayed grounded, focusing more on familial relationship development. The potentially exciting plots were generally wasted on underdeveloped stories that went in predictable directions. Did not cut the chute is a phrase from Rick and Morty itself, meaning something did not work or was not good enough. The review is using the show's own language to criticize it. The key word here is predictable. When a show becomes predictable, it loses what made it special. Rick and Morty was supposed to be the show that could do anything, that would surprise you and take risks. But these episodes followed predictable patterns. Gotron Gerasis Rick Vangelion was a parody of giant robot anime like Voltron and Neon Genesis Evangelion. The show had done anime parodies before, it had done episodes about collecting things before, it had done episodes about the family working together before. None of the elements felt new. And as we have discussed in earlier sections, the episode brought back the giant incest baby, which made it worse. Amortican Grick Fitty was about Morty and Summer stealing Rick's car to impress a new kid at school. The show had done episodes about the kids using Rick's stuff without permission before. It had done episodes about them trying to look cool before. The plot unfolded exactly how you would expect. They get in over their heads, things go wrong, they barely escape. There were no surprises, no creative twists, nothing that made this episode different from similar episodes in previous seasons. The repetition problem was not just about specific episode types. It was also about how episodes structured their plots. Many Season 5 episodes follow the same basic pattern. Introduce a problem, escalate the problem to ridiculous extremes, have characters fight or run around a lot, resolve everything quickly at the end. This is not a bad structure, but when every episode uses it, the show starts to feel samey. Previous seasons had mixed up their storytelling approaches more. Some episodes were quiet and character-focused, some were action-packed, some were experimental with their structure, some took their time building to something, while others moved at breakneck speed. The variety kept the show feeling fresh. Season 5 lacked that variety. Most episodes felt like they were following the same template. The repetition also extended to character dynamics. Rick would be dismissive and sarcastic, Morty would be anxious and complaining, Summer would be trying to act cool. Jerry would be pathetic, Beth would be conflicted about Rick. These character beats had been done so many times that they no longer felt like character traits. They felt like boxes being checked off a list. Good shows let their characters grow and change over time. The characters should not be the same people in Season 5 that they were in Season 1. They should have learned things and been affected by their experiences. But most of Season 5 treated the characters like they were frozen in time, always acting the same way regardless of what had happened to them. The one exception, as we have discussed, was the Planetina episode, which actually let Morty grow and change. But that made the repetition in other episodes more obvious. If the show could allow character development in one episode, why not in others? It felt like the writers were capable of doing better, but chose not to. The problem with repetition is that it makes a show feel tired. It suggests the writers are out of ideas. It makes viewers wonder if they have seen everything the show has to offer. For a show like Rick and Morty, which built its reputation on being creative and unpredictable, repetition is especially damaging. The whole point of the show is that it can go anywhere and do anything with its infinite multiverse concept. So why was Season 5 going to the same places and doing the same things over and over? Some fans tried to defend the repetition by saying that Rick and Morty was meant to be a hangout show, where you just spend time with characters you like. But that only works if the episodes are entertaining and the characters are fun to be around. When the episodes are weak and the characters are stuck in familiar patterns, the hangout loses its appeal. The repetition also made Season 5 feel longer than it actually was. 10 episodes should go by quickly, especially for a show with 22-minute episodes. But Season 5 felt like it dragged because so many episodes felt similar to each other and to previous seasons. There was a sense of, oh, we're doing this again, rather than excitement about what would happen next. Other shows have faced similar problems with repetition. The Simpsons has been criticized for recycling plots across its 30-plus seasons. Family Guy is known for using the same joke structures repeatedly. But those shows have hundreds of episodes. They have earned the right to repeat themselves occasionally. Rick and Morty had only made 41 episodes before Season 5. It should not have been running out of ideas yet. The tragedy is that Season 5 had opportunities to break out of these repetitive patterns. The finale proved the show was willing to make big changes to its universe and mythology. If the rest of the season had been willing to take similar risks, to try new things and surprise viewers, Season 5 could have been remembered as a bold, creative statement. Instead, it is remembered as the season where Rick and Morty started playing it safe and recycling old ideas. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, while the repetitive structures were a problem throughout most of Season 5, the finale itself had the opposite issue. It tried to do too much all at once, and that created its own set of problems. Section 11. The finale's double-edged sword. After 9 episodes of Season 5 that ranged from disappointing to actively bad, with only a few bright spots, the finale arrived. Episode 10 was called Rick Mirai Jack, a play on Samurai Jack, the anime-influenced cartoon. This episode finally delivered what fans had been waiting for since Season 3 ended in 2017. It revealed Rick's true backstory. It brought back evil Morty. It showed the destruction of the Citadel. It changed the fundamental rules of the show's universe. By any measure, it was a huge episode packed with important events. And fans loved it. On IMDb, Rick Mirai Jack scored 9.5 out of 10, making it not only the highest-rated episode of Season 5, but one of the highest-rated episodes in the entire series. Critics praised it for finally answering long-standing questions. Fans debated its implications for the show's future. After 9 weeks of frustration and disappointment, the finale gave viewers something genuinely exciting and meaningful. But here is the problem. The finale's success actually made the rest of Season 5 look worse. The huge gap in quality between Episode 10 and Episodes 1 through 9 highlighted just how weak most of the season had been. If the show was capable of making something as good as Rick, Morty, Jack, why had the previous 9 episodes been so mediocre? The finale proved that the writers could still deliver when they tried, which meant that the earlier failures were choices, not limitations. Let's look at what the finale actually revealed. The episode confirmed that the backstory Rick showed the Galactic Federation in Season 3, Episode 1, The Rick Shank Rickdemption, was real. In that episode, Rick appeared to show a memory of another Rick visiting him and offering him portal technology. When Rick refused, the other Rick killed Rick's wife Diane and daughter Beth with a bomb. This seemed tragic and important, but Rick later suggested it was a fake memory he had made up to trick his captors. For 4 years, fans had debated whether the backstory was real or fake. Rick, Morty, Jack settled the debate. It was real. Rick's wife and daughter really died in an explosion caused by another Rick. This sent Rick on a quest for revenge. He spent years, maybe decades, traveling the multiverse, hunting for the Rick who killed his family. He killed many Ricks along the way, trying to find the right one. Eventually, either from exhaustion or loneliness or desperation, Rick made peace with the other Ricks. Together, they founded the Citadel of Ricks, a society of Ricks from across infinite dimensions. The finale also revealed something darker. The Citadel Ricks realized they could use Morty's to hide themselves from detection, because Morty's brainwaves somehow cancel out Rick's brainwaves. But naturally occurring Mortys were hard to find across infinite dimensions. So the Ricks started forcing them to exist. They would manipulate teenage versions of Beth and Jerry in countless dimensions, making sure they got together and had kids. They were breeding Mortys on purpose, creating grandsons to use as tools. Evil Morty explained all of this to Morty Prime, our main Morty. He showed Morty the truth about the central finite curve, a concept the show had mentioned before but never explained. The central finite curve is a barrier that separates all the universes where Rick is the smartest person from all the universes where he is not. The Ricks built this barrier to wall themselves off from any reality where they might not be the most important person. It was the ultimate expression of Rick's ego and selfishness. Evil Morty's plan was to escape the central finite curve. He did not want to be in any universe with any Rick. He saw the whole system, all the Ricks and all the Mortys, as a cycle of abuse that would never end. So he destroyed the Citadel, killed thousands of Ricks and Mortys in the process, and blasted a hole through the curve. He escaped into the infinite multiverse beyond, where Ricks are not guaranteed to be special. The episode ended with evil Morty floating through space, finally free, while our Rick and Morty were left behind to deal with the consequences. These were massive revelations. The finale answered questions fans had been asking for years. It expanded the mythology in significant ways. It changed the status quo of the show by destroying the Citadel and breaking the central finite curve. And it did all of this in one 22-minute episode. NME, a British music and culture magazine, published a review that captured both the excitement and the problem with this approach. The review stated, "It's almost as if, irritated by the fan base's consistent clamoring for more canon-based content, the show's writers have decided to provide almost all of the answers to almost all of the big questions in one episode." Read that sentence again. Almost all of the answers to almost all of the big questions in one episode. That is too much. No single episode should have to carry that much weight. Each of these revelations deserve time to breathe, to be explored, to sink in. Rick's backstory alone could have been the focus of an entire episode. The truth about the Citadel and the Morty breeding program could have been another episode. Evil Morty's plan and the destruction of the Citadel could have been a third episode. Instead, everything happened at once in a rushed blur. The finale felt less like a satisfying conclusion and more like a checklist. Rick's backstory? Check. Evil Morty's plan? Check. Citadel destroyed? Check. Central finite curve explained? Check. The episode hit all the required plot points, but did not give any of them the attention they deserved. It was like watching someone speed through a museum, glancing at each painting for 2 seconds before moving to the next one. Nerdist, a major entertainment website, published a detailed explanation of everything that happened in the finale. The article had to break down multiple complex concepts. Rick's backstory, the founding of the Citadel, the Morty breeding program, the central finite curve, evil Morty's escape plan. The fact that a single episode required such a lengthy explanation shows how much information was crammed in. The article noted, "Early in Rick and Morty's 5th season, it seemed like the show might never give us any answers. Well, never mind that. Instead, it gave us all the answers." This captures the whiplash of Season 5. For 7 episodes, the season avoided canon entirely. Then suddenly, in the finale, it dumped every answer at once. There was no middle ground, no gradual buildup. It went from 0 to everything in a single jump. The worst part is that the finale proved Season 5 could have been great if it had been structured differently. Imagine if the season had spent time building to these revelations. Episode 1 could have included a small hint about Rick's past. Episode 3 could have shown a brief scene at the Citadel, suggesting something was happening there. Episode 5 could have had Rick acting more defensive or paranoid, foreshadowing what was coming. Episode 8 already delved into Rick's memories with Bird Person, which was good. Episode 9 showed Rick and Morty breaking up, also good. Then Episode 10 could have brought everything together in a way that felt earned rather than sudden. But that is not what happened. Instead, the first 7 episodes ignored the ongoing story almost completely. Then episodes 8, 9, and 10 tried to make up for lost time by cramming in as much plot as possible. The result was that even though the finale was good, it felt disconnected from the rest of the season. It was like the finale belonged to a different, better season that had been building to these moments carefully. The 9.5 IMDb rating for Rick Mirai Jack tells its own story. That rating means most viewers thought the episode was nearly perfect. But look at the ratings for the episodes that came before it. Episode 4, Rick Dependence Spray, scored 5.7. Episode 6, Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation Spectacular, scored around 7.0. Episode 7, Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion, scored around 7.0. These are fine scores, but they are nowhere near 9.5. The finale was multiple points higher than most of the season. That huge gap should not exist in a well-constructed season. Good TV seasons have some variation in episode quality. Not every episode can be the best, but the variation should be small. A well-made season might have episodes that range from 8.0 to 9.5. That shows consistency, with some episodes being exceptional. But Season 5 ranged from 5.7 to 9.5. That is a 4-point spread, which indicates massive inconsistency. It means the season had no quality control, no consistent vision, no understanding of what it was trying to achieve. The finale's success also created a problem for Season 6. By destroying the Citadel and breaking the central finite curve, the show had changed its universe in fundamental ways. Season 6 would have to deal with the consequences of those changes. It could not just ignore them and go back to normal. But based on how Season 5 had gone, fans had little confidence that Season 6 would handle these consequences well. The show had proven it was better at making big changes than at following through on them. Comic Book's article ranking Season 5 episodes addressed this issue. The article noted that the finale continues to ponder some big questions about how this brazenly silly but relentlessly creative show actually functions. The show was questioning its own identity, trying to figure out what it wanted to be. That is not something that should be happening in Season 5. That is something that should have been settled back in Season 1 or 2. The finale succeeded in isolation, but it failed as part of Season 5. It did not feel like the natural conclusion to the season we had been watching. It felt like it belonged to a completely different season that had not been made. The first 9 episodes had not earned the finale. They had not prepared viewers for it. They had not set up the emotional weight that the finale tried to deliver. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. However, the finale's mixed success was not Season 5's only problem with lasting impact. The season also marked a turning point in how popular and culturally relevant Rick and Morty actually was. Section 12. the viewership decline and cultural impact. Fade. In 2017, Rick and Morty was everywhere. You could not go online without seeing Pickle Rick memes. People were rioting at McDonald's over Szechuan sauce. The show's catchphrases were part of everyday internet language. News outlets wrote articles about the show's passionate fan base. Rick and Morty was not just a TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon, a force that shaped internet culture and influenced how people talked about animated comedy. By 2021, when Season 5 aired, all of that had faded. The show was still popular, but it was no longer the cultural juggernaut it had been. Fewer people were watching, fewer people were talking about it. The show had stopped generating memes and viral moments. Season 5 marked the point where Rick and Morty went from being a must-watch cultural event to being just another show that some people liked. That transformation was as much a failure as any individual bad episode. Let's start with the actual viewership numbers. The Season 5 premiere, Mort Dinner Rick Andre, drew 1.9 million viewers when it first aired on June 20th, 2021. That might sound like a lot of people, and compared to many cable shows, it is respectable. But for Rick and Morty, which had broken records with its previous seasons, 1.9 million was disappointing. To understand why, we need to look at the show's history. When Season 3 ended in 2017, it had the best ratings in Adult Swim history. The final episode of Season 3 represented an 81% increase in overall viewers compared to Season 2. That is massive growth. The show was not just maintaining its audience, it was expanding rapidly. According to a Nielsen poll, Season 3 was the most watched television comedy among adults between the ages of 18 and 24. For its target audience, Rick and Morty was the #1 show. Then, Season 4 happened. The fourth season started relatively strong when it premiered in November 2019. The first episode drew 2.33 million viewers, which was decent, but then Adult Swim made a decision that hurt the show. They split Season 4 into 2 parts, with a 5-month gap between the first 5 episodes and the last 5. This frustrating wait caused viewership to drop. By the time the second half of Season 4 aired in May 2020, ratings had fallen by about 40% compared to Season 3's peak. That 40% drop was significant, but Season 5 did not recover those lost viewers. The premiere's 1.9 million viewers showed that the show had stabilized at a lower level. It was not declining further, but it was not growing either. The show had lost a large chunk of its audience and could not get them back. But raw viewership numbers do not tell the whole story. What really showed Season 5's failure was how the show had lost its cultural relevance. Games Radar, a major entertainment website, published an article in August 2021 while Season 5 was still airing. The article was titled, "Rick and Morty Needs to Change, and Embracing Canon is a Good Start." The article stated, "By almost every conceivable metric, viewership, social media engagement, Rotten Tomatoes audience score, the Adult Swim series is waning." Read that carefully. Not just viewership, but social media engagement too. People were not talking about Rick and Morty online the way they used to. The show was not trending on Twitter after new episodes aired. Reddit discussions were less active. YouTube reaction videos were getting fewer views. The audience that remained was less enthusiastic and less likely to share their excitement with others. The article continued, "What was once a cornerstone of pop culture consciousness is in serious danger of fizzling out in remarkably low-key fashion." This is a devastating assessment. Fizzling out in remarkably low-key fashion means the show was not dying dramatically or memorably. It was just quietly becoming less relevant. People were not angry at the show or campaigning against it. They were simply losing interest and moving on to other things. The most telling sign of Season 5's cultural irrelevance was the complete lack of memorable moments. Think back to earlier seasons. Season 1 gave us Wubba Lubba Dub Dub and Mr. Meeseeks. Season 2 gave us Show Me What You Got and Tiny Rick. Season 3 gave us Pickle Rick and the Szechuan Sauce Craze. These were not just good episodes. They were cultural moments that spread beyond the show's fan base. People who had never watched Rick and Morty knew about Pickle Rick. That is the mark of true cultural impact. Season 5 produced nothing like that. No catchphrases caught on, no characters became memes, no moments went viral. The closest thing to a memorable moment was the giant incest baby, but that was memorable for being terrible, not for being good. People remembered it as the thing they hated, not as something they wanted to share and celebrate. The Szechuan sauce phenomenon from 2017 is worth examining more closely. In the Season 3 premiere, Rick mentioned Szechuan sauce, a limited edition McDonald's sauce from 1998 that had been discontinued. This one joke in one episode caused such a huge reaction that McDonald's brought the sauce back. When they did, people went crazy. There were long lines at McDonald's. Some locations ran out of sauce, and people got angry. News outlets covered it like it was a major event. All of this happened because of one joke in a Rick and Morty episode. Season 5 had no moment that came close to generating that level of cultural impact. The show had lost its ability to create those viral moments that transcended the show itself. This was not just because Season 5 was worse than Season 3, though it was. It was also because the show's moment in the spotlight had passed. By 2021, people had moved on to other shows and other internet obsessions. Slash Film, a major entertainment website, published an article in November 2022 while Season 6 was airing. The article looked back at Season 5 and what it meant for the show's future. The article stated, "Sometimes I almost miss the days when Rick and Morty fans were annoying everyone by running the Pickle Rick meme into the ground or causing chaos at McDonald's restaurants throughout the country." For the first half of Season 6, unless you were actively seeking the fandom out, it was easy not to even notice that the new season was airing at all. Think about what that is saying. The writer missed the days when Rick and Morty fans were everywhere and hard to avoid. That might seem strange. Why would anyone miss being annoyed? But the point is that even annoying overexposure proved the show was culturally important. When Season 6 aired, by contrast, it was possible to completely miss that new episodes existed. The show had become invisible to people outside its remaining fan base. The article continued. Most of the posts that do go viral about Rick and Morty these days are just about how the author of the post has stopped watching it, or they're complaining about all the incest, which is fair. This is brutal. The only time Rick and Morty went viral was when people were explaining why they quit watching or complaining about the giant incest baby. Negative attention is not the same as positive cultural impact. Season 5 also marked the point where Rick and Morty stopped influencing other shows. In 2017 and 2018, the success of Rick and Morty had spawned imitators. Solar Opposites, co-created by Justin Roiland, was described as a spiritual successor. Final Space tried to capture some of the same science fiction comedy energy. Inside Job, which premiered in 2021, was specifically compared to Rick and Morty as an alternative that handled similar themes better. These shows existed because Rick and Morty had proven there was an audience for adult animated science fiction comedy. But after Season 5, Rick and Morty was no longer the standard that other shows were measured against. Inside Job was praised as what Rick and Morty used to be, rather than as a Rick and Morty clone. The conversation had shifted from, can other shows match Rick and Morty, to, can Rick and Morty get back to what made it good? The show had gone from being the leader to being the cautionary tale. The decline in cultural impact also showed up in how people recommended the show. Before Season 5, if someone asked, should I watch Rick and Morty? The answer was usually an enthusiastic yes. The show was considered essential viewing for anyone who liked animated comedy or science fiction. But after Season 5, recommendations became more complicated. People would say things like, watch Seasons 1 through 3, maybe 4, but you can skip most of 5 except the finale. That is not how you talk about a show that is still culturally important. The tragedy of Season 5's cultural fade is that it did not have to happen this way. If the season had been good, if it had delivered on its promise of, quote, epic canon, if it had avoided disasters like Rick Dependence Spray, the show could have maintained its cultural relevance. Other long-running shows have managed to stay important for years. The Simpsons dominated popular culture for over a decade. South Park has remained culturally relevant for over 25 years by adapting to changing times. Rick and Morty could not even maintain its cultural dominance for 5 full seasons. By Season 5, just 8 years after the show premiered, it had already lost the special place it once held in internet culture. The show would continue, of course. It had 70 episodes ordered, guaranteeing its survival through Season 10. But survival is not the same as success. A show can keep airing new episodes while slowly losing the audience and cultural relevance that once made it special. Conclusion Season 5 marked the end of Rick and Morty as a cultural phenomenon, and the beginning of Rick and Morty as just another animated sitcom with a dedicated but shrinking fan base. That transformation, more than any single bad episode or creative misstep, is what makes Season 5 the worst season of Rick and Morty. It was the season where the show stopped being special. Looking back at everything that went wrong with Season 5, the critical decline, the giant incest baby disaster, the overuse of meta-humor, the canon contradiction, the humor decline, the wasted potential of the Planetina episode, the identity crisis, the mishandled Rick and Morty breakup, the repetitive structures, the overwhelming finale, and the loss of cultural relevance, it becomes clear that this was not a season with one or two problems. It was a season that failed on almost every level. And while later seasons would attempt to recover from this failure, the damage to the show's reputation and its place in popular culture was already done. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.